A couple of things before we get started. You can call me Natasha. I am not American, and I won't tell you exactly where I'm from for safety reasons. Yours, not mine. I'm also not going to bother explaining how I got into this line of work. Needless to say, I'm not a victim. I'm not looking for your pity. And I'm most definitely not in need of any rescue. My sole purpose for sharing this story is to share some of my most extraordinary experiences with a community that I believe would be interested in them. And no, I will not be offering my services to any of you, so don't be a smartass. Thank you. I've been a sex worker for well over a decade now, and in those long years I have come across many a curious client. A normal, well-adjusted adult would faint if they saw the kind of freaky shit I've been a witness to, or participated in. I've had clients who paid me to spit on them, stomp them, all the while wearing gold-rimmed glasses and a white wig and berating them like I was their disappointed grandma. I've farted in glass jars and sold the said containers. I've worn a collar and pranced around a motel room, barking like a dog and sipping water from a bowl for over an hour, earning a fat wad of cash for not even doing anything sexual at all. There was even a time I treated a 45-year-old man like a literal baby, changing his diapers after he shit in them, singing him a lullaby as he bawled, sucked on his thumb, and cradled him. The point is, as sex workers, we get to see the true nature of humanity in all its pitiable and hideous glory. A reality that almost never reveals itself to civilized societies. But sometimes we end up encountering monsters who lie beyond even our understanding of human nature. Creatures that lurk in the deep shadows that twist around the congested streets of our red light district, ready to prey on anyone foolish enough to step too close to them. A quick death would be preferable to falling into their clutches. This is true evil. I was in my early 20s when I first ran into one of them. There had been news reports of missing young sex workers floating around those days. News reports I casually brushed aside as being nothing too out of the ordinary. After all, it wasn't all that rare for prostitutes to get murdered by unstable johns or exploitive pimps, was it? I can't imagine news of that would shock any of you. My youthful arrogance prevented me from understanding that there's a huge difference between knowing that evil exists out there and actually coming face to face with it. I had been working for over 3 years by then, having just graduated from turning tricks on street corners under salacious neon signs to having my own private room in my then madam's establishment, doing specialized work for freaks, earning a lot more than most of my co-workers. I guess having the stomach to do things that would make most girls cry in fear and disgust really worked in my favor, though I'm sure the others would disagree over who exactly had it better. My appointments those days, or nights, should I say, were handled directly by the madam. The clients would come visit me in my private room, or I'd go to them, either at their place or at a hotel that charged by the hour. Regardless of where I went, I would always be accompanied by one of the madam's muscles. To protect the merchandise, of course. My most frequent chaperone at the time was this bald, broad-shouldered mountain of a man. He had a short beard, tattoos all over his arms, and despised rap music. So I called him Lil Pimp. I met Lil Pimp just outside the establishment that night. The air was tingling with a pleasant chill and the enticing smell of kebabs that wafted over the new Lebanese restaurant across the street. Lil Pimp pulled up in his black SUV with tinted windows as I stood sucking on a cigarette, taking care not to smear my bright red lipstick. "Hop in," he said, pushing open the passenger door. I tossed the cigarette aside, clutched my purse, and climbed into the car, plastic sheets squishing as I eased back into the seat. You really need to take this shit off, I remarked. And he chuckled. No way. Wouldn't want any stains all over the expensive leather. I rolled my eyes. Oh yeah? Well, how are you going to stop that from happening when your boyfriend's pounding your ass in the back seat? Fuck you, he growled. You're going to have to pay me for that, little pimp, I said, grinning, though I doubt the madam would let you fuck the merchandise. Oh, real hilarious, aren't you? He muttered as he turned the key and made the car purr to life. Smiling, I turned my neck and looked out the window, out at the sidewalk where a scantily clad woman stood waiting for customers, cigarettes jammed between their rotting teeth. The world was truly harsh, and it became all the more clear as the car left the red light area and pulled up on respectable markets in nicer neighborhoods. Gone were the neon signs in the small, crumbling buildings with damp walls and cramped rooms. I heaved a sigh of longing as I gazed out at places people can actually live, decent, peaceful lives in, where you can go to bed without worrying about stray gunshots or the police bursting into your home without any warning. And about 10 minutes later, it got even better. The car rolled past a wide-open wrought iron gate and descended a sloping road onto a luscious valley dotted with spacious mansions and their sprawling, carefully maintained lawns. Even the ornate Victorian street lamps screamed wealth. Not what you were expecting, Lil Pimp asked as he made a left turn. I shook my head. I certainly hadn't expected to come to a place like this, but then again, I really shouldn't have been surprised. After all, the richer they are, the sicker they tend to be. The road went on ahead of us, on a gentle slope upwards before twisting to the right. On the turn sat a big two-storied house with red brick walls. It was dark, suspiciously so. Even the lights at the gate were switched off, which itself was locked shut. It seemed like someone tried a bit too hard to give the impression that nothing suspicious was happening in this house. That's the place. Thought so. He nodded. You have your phone on you? Yes. Give me a call if something goes wrong. Okay. You got the pepper spray in your purse? Yep, I do. Good. Tell him I'm waiting for you outside. Sure thing. I opened the door and swung my legs out. Hey, Natasha. I paused. Lil Pimp looked at me with a frown on his face. You heard the rumors going around recently, right? About the girls? The disappearing girls? I raised my brow. Yeah? A couple whores disappearing off the streets? Not exactly breaking news, is it? He closed his eyes and shook his head in irritation. Just be careful, is all I'm saying. I'll be right here if you need me. And he patted his gun holster. Thanks. I flashed him a genuinely grateful smile and climbed out of the car. Knowing that he was there did make me feel comfortable, even though at the time I foolishly thought he was being a little too paranoid. Hindsight, though. Am I right? Pulling my purse back on my shoulder, I started walking towards the house, my heels clicking on the cobblestone pavement. Crickets hidden in damp grass erupted in a furious chatter around me as I approached the house. Somewhere in the distance, a dog let out a mournful howl. This short walk just before session always made me feel queasy, like the contents of my stomach were sloshing around. My head buzzed with a million questions. Who was my client? What was he like? What will I have to do? I couldn't wait to get inside and find out. And get it over with. Just then, almost as my thoughts had been heard, the gate of the house swung open with a rusted groan. It wasn't the whole gate exactly, just a small door set into the larger structure off to the left side. Shadows pooled at the rectangular gap that opened up, but I could make out a figure standing there, shuffling on his feet impatiently. I brushed a stray strand of dark hair behind my earlobe and continued walking. Natasha, right? Came the deep voice of the man at the gate. I could see him a bit better from his distance. He was wearing a black hoodie and a pair of faded jeans. Seemed to be in his late 30s, had short black hair that peeked from beneath the hood, exhausted brown eyes set in sockets that were beginning to turn doughy, and a pink birthmark on his left cheekbone that made him look like someone had slapped him. hard. Well, come on in. I smiled, ducked my head, and entered the property. You showed up right on time. I do appreciate that, the man said as he shut the gate behind me, then stuffed his hands in his pockets and marched off towards the house. Come. I followed, letting my eyes wander over the lawn. Walled in by a tall and thick hedge, it held a certain beauty that's hard to achieve without both wealth and time. Two luxuries that seemed far out of my reach. Colorful flowers shone under the gentle moonlight, swayed mesmerizingly with the cool breeze that made my skin feel soft. My ears tingled with the sound of babbling of a garden waterfall, and envy reddened my cheeks. Well, the man asked, pulling me out of my own head. Are you coming? He was holding the front door open, looking at me questioningly. I nodded and climbed the short flight of stairs leading to the door. He entered first, strode off to the right, and flipped the light switch on before gesturing at me to come in. Opulence that bothered on the obscene greeted me as I walked into the house. Fuck. But I would have to work nonstop for half a year before I could afford just the rug in this place. All right, the man said, rubbing his hands together. Let's get started, shall we? Sure, I replied. Just point me to the bathroom and I'll quickly freshen up. Oh, no. Don't bother. This will be over quick. He chuckled as he pointed at himself. I fought the urge to roll my eyes and shrugged. Maybe he wanted me to stare at him. Maybe that was his kink. I'd seen worse. A smile flashed across his face, making his birthmark ripple. Okay, great. Let's head to the basement, shall we? I froze. Excuse me? He looked at me blankly. The basement. That's where we'll have our session. I could feel my heart sink in my chest. Is something wrong? He asked, confused, like he couldn't tell what was wrong here. No, motherfucker. There's no chance I'm going down into your soundproof kill room. I don't do basements. He frowned. But I spoke to your madam on the phone, and she said you'd be open to anything. That wasn't a lie, was it? Trapped by my own reputation. No, it wasn't. Listen, it's just that basements at this hour... Oh, his eyes widened. You're worried I'm going to kill you. Well, you don't have to be scared of that. It's not why I called you here. I tried to think of a suitable reply to give to this nutcase. Listen, he said, giving me a wide grin. I'm not going to hurt you. I can't, really. I spoke to your madam, and she told me she sent one of her thugs with you. Not to mention that, but she has my address. There's no way I could get away with it, right? You could if you were a squatter. You could kill me and escape before Lil Pimp could even get here. No one would even know who killed me. All of these thoughts were rolling around in my mind. Listen, I'm not even going to touch you. I'm going to be paying attention to myself while watching you. That's it, and that's all I want. He could sense the indecision in me. How about I double the money? Would that make you feel better? Maybe I was overthinking it. Okay, 15 minutes. That's all I'll give you. I'm going to text my friend outside that if I'm not out in that time, he can come fetch me himself. He then clapped his hands. Perfect. I really should have asked why we needed to go down to the basement for him to watch me. I really should have. I was already regretting my decision a couple minutes later when we began descending the rickety stairs, a single overhead incandescent light bulb lighting our way. The basement was in stark contrast to the rest of the house. The roof was too low, the stairs too old. The damp walls stank of rotting water and dead critters. The contrast between the basement and the rest of the house was just too jarring, and it set my nerves on edge. We reached the landing at the bottom. Wait here, the man said. Let me switch on the lights. I waited as he disappeared into the darkness. My ears soon picked up the sound of something scraping against the floor, wooden chairs being shifted, cardboard boxes being kicked around, and the rattling of chains. A click, and the basement was blasted with the sharp yellow glow of another light bulb. A scream died in my throat. In a corner of the basement, a girl was chained to the walls. A dirty rag was stuffed in her mouth as heavy shackles bound her wrists and ankles. She moaned and shifted ever so slightly. I gasped. Oh my God. This girl. She must have been one of them. Those who disappeared off the streets. Sweat beaded on my forehead as my hands began trembling. Good God, how the fuck did I get into this mess? Hey, the man shouted, holding a pistol in his left hand and a claw hammer in his right. He was naked from the waist down. Don't be scared. I'm not going to hurt you. Remember? I raised my head, stared at him. Stay right there now, he said as he tossed the hammer and snatched it out of the air. Whistling, he began walking towards the girl, who finally saw what was happening and began struggling with her shackles. It was useless. The chains were too strong. She took them once again and sobbed into the rag. The man kept whistling as he strolled towards her. Move, I told myself. Stop this monster. Without even thinking about it, I reached for the pepper spray in my purse. Nuh-uh, the man said, turning around and pointing the gun at me. Keep your fucking hands to your sides and just watch. That's all you have to do. My hand shot away from the purse like it had been zapped. Good girl, he sang as he turned his back to me. You too. I saw that she was looking at me, sad, pathetic little eyes, pleading, begging me to save her. The light bulb overhead was reflected in those shimmering blue pools like a tiny flame of hope. Tears of shame singed my eyelashes. The man lifted the hammer high, brought it down on the girl's head. Once, twice, 3 times. The metal connected with her head with a wet crunch, crushing the bone, deforming the skull, tearing through the flesh in the way. Blood and brain matter sprayed the wall, the floor, and lashed the man swinging the hammer. My heart pounded so hard in my chest I was afraid it was going to explode. I was frozen with fear. I know I should have done something to save her, or at least tried to run, but it all happened so fast. I didn't even get the chance to wrap my head around what was happening, and the poor girl was already dead. Next thing I knew, he was looking at me, cold brown eyes burning holes through me. His hand was slathered with blood, and he was using it on himself. That's it, he moaned. That's exactly what I wanted. I shuddered. This creepy fucker. This is what he called me here for. He wanted to enjoy my fear and helplessness. Nah, fuck that. I might have been too scared to stop him, but I wasn't giving him what he wanted. I gritted my teeth, hardened my eyes. It was the least I could do. So, I said deliberately, killing all the emotion in my voice. What is it that you want me here for? He stopped. What? You killed the girl? I continued in a deadpan manner. I didn't need to be here for that. So why did you call me? What do you want me to do? Annoyance flashed in his eyes. I already told you. Just stand there and let me watch you. Whatever, I said, trying to sound bored. Just get it over with. I could see the confusion on his face. He was angry and frustrated and excited. Didn't know whether to ask me what I was thinking or finish it, and he chose the latter. Feeling emboldened, I shook my head and started observing my fingernails. He tried to keep going, but it wasn't working for him anymore. Of course it wasn't. You, he said. What are you doing? Nothing. What are you doing? I don't understand what you're saying. Are you not scared? Nope. I actually was fucking terrified. You're lying. You're trying to hide your fear. Why? I'm not. This was a total lie. Not scared of this. Why would I be? It's not like you can hurt me. We've already established that, haven't we? I was provoking him, and it was reckless, I know. He snorted. Are you stupid? Do you understand the position you're in? I just killed someone in front of you. I smirked. A pathetic shitweasel like you can only hurt someone who can't protect herself. And I know you don't have the balls to do shit to me. He gawped at me. What? What did you just say to me? Only that you're a fucking loser with a tiny dick. Bitch. He charged at me, forgetting about his pistol in his rage. When he was 2 steps away from me, I pulled out the pepper spray from my purse and blasted him in the face. He screamed, smashed his hands on his eyes, and dropped down to his knees. I didn't waste a second, was already running up the stairs when he began fumbling for his gun. My whole body was shivering as I ran back to the car. My muscles felt like jelly, thought I was going to dissolve right then and there, melt like ice cream and slide off into a drain. Lil Pimp jumped out of the car and dashed towards me when I was about halfway back. He made me sit in the car, helped me calm down, and then wrapped his jacket around me before running towards the house, gun drawn. And now here's where it gets really terrifying. This is the reason why I'm telling this story. See, Little Pimp didn't find the man there. Instead, he encountered a family of 7 who'd been in that house all night long. At first, I reckoned he'd gone to the wrong house, but he hadn't. Then I thought that maybe the family had by some odd miracle slept through the whole thing, and even the gunshot. I was wrong on that too. Because when I went to speak to them, I saw that the inside of their home looked absolutely nothing like the house I had just been in. That's when I understood how that man had been able to get away with those murders. Because when I walked into that house, I'd gone somewhere else entirely. I'm a sex worker. Have been for more than 10 years now. And in that time, I've had some truly memorable encounters. I've had sessions where I've laughed and cried and screamed in anger. There have been times where I've felt bone-chilling terror, and also times I've thrown up on clients mid-session out of sheer disgust. Seriously, you would not believe the kind of shit that some men are willing to do in front of a hooker. For a long time, I wondered about that. What is it about us sex workers that gets men to open up, truly open up, and expose their deepest and darkest secrets? Secrets they wouldn't even dream of sharing with their own wives and mothers. It was my old madam who explained it all to me. Said that it's in the very nature of our profession. We offer services that involve the most intimate acts between 2 human beings, the purest and dirtiest things that people can do to each other. But there's also an element of distance here, a cash-driven degree of separation that precludes the sneers and judgments that come in close relationships. This delightful cocktail of intimacy and professional aloofness is what makes men feel safe enough to let their true selves out, no matter how pathetic or monstrous it might be. It's like therapy, with sex as the added bonus. Or sex therapy, I don't know. I'm a prostitute, not a psychologist. What I do know is that the services I offer have helped my clients deal with some really dark shit. Trauma that cut so deep that they'd fall apart if they dared talk about it. Rarely do I find out what the cause of all that pain actually is, but the fact that they seem visibly relaxed after a session with me always brings me great joy. The Weeper was one such client. A middle-aged man from China. He would book 1 hour with me each Wednesday night. Always in my private room at my madame's establishment. He would come into the room, smile, and bow his head. That would be the cue. We would proceed to take off our clothes before lying face-to-face on the bed. He would then bury his head in my chest and cry while I held him tight and rubbed his back. For 1 hour. No sex. Nothing sexual at all, in fact. Just a man crying his heart out. After the hour was up, he would get up, wipe his face, put his clothes back on, bow once again, and leave. Without ever saying a word. At first, I was greatly disturbed to have this older man weeping in my arms. I mean, he would sob so hard his entire body would shake. I could feel the pain deep within his soul, made my heart tremble just thinking about what might have happened to him. But over time, I came to appreciate the fact that doing this, being with me, helped take some load off his chest. I started looking forward to our sessions. It felt good that I was helping someone. It's a little messed up, I know. He once came close to bearing his heart in front of me, but unfortunately for the both of us, something else happened that night. Something so disturbingly revolting it threw the entire establishment into chaos. It was the incident known as the final shot. You might now be wondering why I chose to talk about the Weeper at all if this story isn't about him. Well, the reason I went off on that seg is that I want you to appreciate just how keen I was to learn the secret and just how annoyed I felt at losing the opportunity. Initially, that is. For the second I saw what was happening 3 rooms down the hallway, all thoughts of the Weeper dissipated from my mind like the fog under a warm morning sun. It was raining that night. I could hear it drumming on the glass window as I got up on my elbow and began rummaging through the drawer near the bed, looking for a cigarette. It was the end of my session with the Weeper, and as always, I wanted to smoke, to relieve the tension in my shoulders. Time with the Weeper was emotionally intense. As I wrapped my finger around a loose cigarette, I felt the hand on my naked shoulder. It was the Weeper, sitting up on the bed facing me, having made no moves towards getting dressed up. I frowned. That was unusual. He'd been coming for months and never had he stayed after the clock had run out. I saw the muscles on his face churning with indecision. There was a flicker of hope in his red, swollen eyes. He wanted to say something. My heart began to race. It was the first time he was ever going to speak to me. What would he say, I wondered? Would he tell me his story? Anticipation quickly turned into irritation, as we were both distracted by the sound of bare feet frantically slapping against the cold tiled floor of the hallway outside. Someone was coming. A pretty round face framed by long curly brown hair popped in through the gap in the pink curtains at the door. Natasha. It was Victoria, one of the newer girls. She was a couple of years older than me, had sought refuge with the madam just months ago. Said she was running from her demons. I found her to be very clingy and insecure. What? I asked, annoyed. I told you not to interrupt me when I'm working. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, she whined, tears black with mascara rolling down her cheeks. But I really need your help. Something is seriously wrong, and I don't know what to do. She was naked, frightened out of her wits. What the fuck? Please, she sobbed. I glanced at the Weeper. Stone-faced, he was putting his clothes back on. The moment was gone. Fuck. I clenched my jaw and looked at Victoria again, who stood cowering and shivering at the doorway. God, I wanted to slap this stupid bitch. Fuck it, I said, and reached for my robe, quickly throwing it on. Fastening the cord around my waist, I marched out of the room. This had better be something important, I said as Victoria struggled to match pace with me. It is, she stammered. I wouldn't have come to you if it wasn't. I didn't know what to do, and it really freaked me out, so I came to you for help. I know you said not to bother you, but I just didn't. Quit blabbering, I said as I stopped outside her room. I turned to tell her to put some damn clothes on when a low, anguish-filled moan came from inside the room she'd been using. What the fuck? Victoria's eyes were wide with terror. She really didn't want to go back in there. What could possibly be so bad? I pulled the curtain aside, and the sight beyond made bile rise up in my throat. It was a man, late 40s I'd say, fat, naked, lying spread eagle on the bed. Seemed to be pretty ordinary except for his groin, which, for the lack of a better word, was gangrenous. The skin was black, like it had been charred, with edges that were yellow with pus and seemed to pulsate. He was erect, painfully so, aiming at the ceiling like it wanted to tear itself off his body. Black veins ran down it, which itself was dotted with patches of red flesh, like someone was trying to carve it with a knife. Strange bubbles of white, yellow pus, and red blood rested precariously at the top. My eyes watered at the disgusting sight. A vile stench of death and rot hung in the air, made me gag, something I hadn't done in a very long time. What the fuck, Victoria? I swore, covering my mouth and nose with my hand. This man needs a doctor, not sex. Well, he wouldn't let me, she whined. What the fuck? No, the man shouted, his voice hoarse, like it struggled to fight its way out of his throat. No, no, no. Please, no doctors. Listen, dude, you are fucking sick, okay? You need help. Victoria, go call 911. No, he shouted as a shudder ran through him. No doctors. They can't help me. Just give me what I paid for. Oh, no. No. There's no way I'm sucking that thing. Please, Natasha. Oh, no. No, Natasha, please don't make me suck it. Victoria screamed before running towards me. Of course not. Don't be ridiculous. I'm calling for an ambulance. No. Please. Just let me be here, okay? I need this. There's something inside me and I need to get it out. Please, I'll die. I just know I'll die. I didn't even know what to say to that. I started walking away. Wait, he said weakly. Just have a look. You'll see for yourself. I paused. I won't lie, I was a little curious. What could have happened to reduce this man to such a state? I wanted to see for myself. After my encounter with the serial killer in the disappearing house, I had become very interested in things that seemed to defy all logic. All right, I'll have a look. The relief on his face was immediate. He squeezed his eyes shut and let his head rest on a pillow. I entered the room, crunching my nose as the smell got stronger, nauseatingly so. I tiptoed around to the side of the bed, maintaining a more than healthy distance from his decaying body, and looked down at him. Under the soft glow from the lamps fixed on the walls and the ceiling, I observed the mess on his groin. Cold shivers racked my spine as I got a closer look. There was something moving beneath the rotting necrotic flesh around his pelvic bone. Worms. Inches in length, hundreds of them, writhing beneath the skin. Pus flooded out of his wounds each time one of them approached the edges of the dead skin and fled back towards the epicenter of the rot. The way the worms moved, stretching and wrinkling the wet, dead skin made me want to hurl. I could taste the vomit on my tongue. I didn't know how to stop myself from throwing up. Oh, God, he groaned. The squishy sound of a wet armpit fart made me jump back in fright. The flesh in his body started to collapse. It sank into his body, creating a cavity and exposing his entrails and yellowed bones to the elements. And then he did it. And then it happened. His entire body convulsed as thick ropes shot out like diluted toothpaste with the sound you make when you rub your dry hand on a balloon. It wriggled in the air like a dozen live creatures freshly born before landing all over the man and the bed, sizzling like an omelet as it landed, burning the mattress and the flesh of the dying man. 2 screams, high-pitched, mine and Victoria's. But the nightmare hadn't ended. It was just beginning. The worms sizzled and began eating their way through the man and the mattress, and finally the wood. A sharp crack echoed in the room as the plywood beneath the mattress snapped, allowing the worms to fall through. Get the fuck back, I shouted at Victoria, who was crying hysterically at this point like a lost child. I darted back towards the door, just as there was another crack, this one louder. It sounded like stone. The worms ate their way through the floor and fell down into the room below. Oh no. Oh no. Victoria sobbed. I ignored her whimpering and ran past her, down the hallway around the corner and then down the stairs. My heart thumping in my chest. I was terrified, hoping that the girl in the downstairs room was okay and hadn't been infected by those blasted things. A couple of the madam's enforcers were strolling in the hallway downstairs, making sure the girls were safe. I ran past them, not bothering to tell them what exactly was going on, and dashed towards the room just beneath Victoria's. But I was too late. The girl, Elise, was standing at the foot of the bed, her lifeless eyes fixed on her client. The man's head had been smashed to a pulp. Blood and gore stained the mattress, which itself was intact. No holes in it. I couldn't tell what did it, whether it was the rubble that fell from the room above or the worms. There were no signs of the latter either. "Elise," I said with trepidation, "are you okay?" She looked dazed. It was obvious she'd checked out. I doubt she even knew what was going on. I walked up to her, put my arm around her shoulder. "Are you okay?" I asked again. I don't know what happened," she mumbled. I don't know." "Shh, it's okay, girl. Let's get you out of here." The entire establishment was vacated for 3 weeks after the accident. Guys in hazmat suits combed through each and every inch of the building to find any trace of whatever had infected Victoria's client. They didn't find anything. Those worms had just disappeared, vanished into thin air. Business resumed after 3 weeks, but the incident was remembered for a long, long time. And not just because of what happened that night. See, we were relieved that whatever vile thing that was had ended. But it hadn't. I was the first one to spot it. A small worm moving in Elise's eyeball. The horror soon took a completely new form, but that's a story for another day. As someone who's been in this line of work for such a long time, I've met countless others who've been involved in prostitution. We all have our own reasons for getting into this business, and while usually each situation is mundane, there are cases when it gets genuinely horrific. A drug habit gone out of control, the burning desire to not starve to death out on the streets, victimization at the hands of sex traffickers, or sometimes even your own family. Unfortunately, not everyone is lucky or privileged enough to choose to do this, to have agency, control over their lives, and walk out of it with their heads held high. Some of us are swept by the tides of time, forced by factors far out of our control to sink deep into the muddy morass that is prostitution. This is why it's considered rude to pry into the past of a hooker. You never know what you're going to find, so you just don't talk about it, unless she willingly discloses that information. And when she does, it's important that you listen attentively, even if it is so horrible that just listening to it wrings your heart out, even if it sounds too terrible to be true. And on that note, I'm going to tell you about one such story. Not mine, but a friend's. The circumstances under which this story was revealed to me were quite unusual, and what happened after that, even more so. And that's the reason that I'm choosing to share the tale of the stalker. I remember it being a chilly Saturday night. Autumn's pleasant warmth was fading, and the evening breeze that sweeps down from the mountains was getting colder day by day. Our establishment had been shut down for a couple of weeks for fumigation after the worm incident. The madam had given us a couple days off, said that we'd more than earned it, but that we'd start doing house calls, or home deliveries as we called it, by sometime early next week. So, taking advantage of my short holiday and the fact that it was a Saturday, I decided to treat myself to the Lebanese restaurant across the street from my workplace. And that's where I ran into Victoria. I was marching towards my favorite table with a smile on my face, happy that no one had taken my spot, when I heard her unbearably squeaky voice. "Natasha!" I fought the urge to groan as I spotted her sitting at a table in the corner, just out of sight of the front door. She was smiling and waving at me, her long brown curls jiggling with emotion. If I had known she was there, I wouldn't have come. Even the mouth-watering smell of lamb wafting from the kitchen wouldn't have been enough to make me stay. Victoria isn't bad, of course, just highly annoying. "Hey, Victoria," I greeted her with a weak smile. "Come here," she said, waving at me. "Come sit with me." Great, I thought. What better way to spend my Saturday night than with this resident nut? I couldn't just say no. Networking is important in every business, way more so in ours. Having good relations with enforcers and fellow hookers can very well mean the difference between life and death in some situations. Telling myself that it had to be done, I strode across the restaurant, ignoring the lustful glares being shot my way by the men on the other tables. I wasn't working that night. They could make do with their hands. "So good to see you," she exclaimed as I slid into the seat opposite her. "I didn't know you were going to be here as well. What a quinky dink." I chuckled. "Yeah, well, I can't really resist her lamb." She laughed obnoxiously. "True, it's so delicious and terrible for my waistline. I feel like a whale every time I eat here." "Oh, honey," I said, patting her hand. "Don't feel bad about that. I know some men are really into that sort of stuff." That little quip made her guffaw so loudly that the people seated nearby turned and looked at us, especially the two boys at the table to my right. They were quite young, college kids maybe. One of them smiled at us. "You girls having fun tonight?" he asked. "We sure are," Victoria said, grabbing a napkin and dabbing at the teardrops on her face. "And why wouldn't we be?" I added. "It's a lovely Saturday evening, and we're two young women trying to make the best of our lives." "Absolutely," she said, smiling. "Well, that's great," the boy said before pointing at himself and his friend. "Because we're two young men trying to do the same. How about you join us and we hang out together?" Victoria started to say something, but I cut her off. "I'm afraid that won't be possible. I doubt the two of you could afford us." His mouth dropped open as he quickly realized who he was trying to flirt with. He muttered something under his breath and quickly turned away before telling his friend to shut up and stop laughing at him. "Wow, Natasha, that was rude," she scolded me. I shrugged. They know where they are, don't they? What were they expecting? Besides, it's much better they find out now rather than later. Instead of just getting flustered, they're likely to reply with their fists, right? And I don't have time for that shit right now. She nodded solemnly. Before we could continue our conversation, one of the three waiters at the place came and took our order. A balding middle-aged man by the name of Kareem. He was from Morocco, not Lebanon. A fact that he had to clarify hundreds of times a day to tipsy patrons. After Kareem jotted down our order on his leather-bound pad and walked off towards the kitchen, I made my single biggest mistake of the night. After deciding to eat there, that is. "So, Victoria, how are you doing these days?" I asked. The question wiped a smile off her face. She frowned, the muscles in her body tightening due to the tension. The transformation was so sudden, like a lightning strike. You don't have to answer that if you don't want to," I stammered. She closed her eyes, breathed out in an exaggerated manner. "No, I want to talk about it." She put her hands on the table and clasped them nervously. "I think I'm being haunted again." "Oh, fuck. Haunted? By what? And what do you mean again?" "A demon. All aboard the crazy train." I couldn't help but laugh at this in my mind. She sighed. "You don't believe me, do you?" "No, that's not it, Victoria." She shook her head. "Oh, come on. I can see it in your eyes. You think I'm crazy." I totally thought she was fucking crazy. "That's not it, Victoria. I don't think you're crazy, and I don't think you're lying." There was a pause as she contemplated whether to believe me or not. After making a decision, she continued. "Do you know how I became a whore?" "No, but if you want to talk, I'll hear it." She nodded almost gratefully. "I'm a runaway. I just had to, to escape from that thing." I waited in silence for her to keep speaking. "I used to have a normal life. Loving parents, a beautiful house in the suburbs, a boyfriend who truly cared for me, and friends who would, and well did, die for me." Tears dropped from her eyelids. I don't know how long that thing had been in my life, just lurking in the shadows, but I do remember when he first made an appearance. It was a couple of weeks before prom. I started receiving these little notes in my bag, my locker, in our mailbox, everywhere, from a secret admirer, really mushy and full of intimate stuff that only someone very close to me would know. At first, I thought it was my boyfriend. Thought that he was trying to set the stage for a promposal, you know? You can imagine how terrified I was when he told me that it wasn't him. Jesus, Victoria. I mean, who else would know all this if not him? Was it one of my friends trying to pull a prank on me? I asked them politely at first, then screamed at them, but their surprised and frightened expressions just confirmed that it really wasn't them. We were all worried. We had no idea who the stalker was. We tried our hardest to find him, but got nowhere. And it only made him angry. The tone of the messages he was leaving changed. They were threatening now. Full of rage and hatred, warning me to stop looking for him, telling me that he was going to hurt the people I loved if I didn't stop. Well, what did you do? She blew her nose. I went to the cops. They promised they'd look into it. Didn't seem to take it all that seriously, though. That quickly changed because he killed my boyfriend that night. His mother found his head spinning in the washing machine when she went to do the laundry. She used the napkin to blow her nose. I was devastated, inconsolable. I couldn't believe what had happened. It was just horrible. I can't imagine what you must have gone through. Well, that wasn't the end, though, was it? I swore to fight for my boyfriend, to get him justice. The demon hated that I still had the will to fight. So he started killing the others, my friends. They were all killed, one by one, shot to death, stabbed hundreds of times, brutally beaten, and then drowned in bathtubs. One vicious murder after another. I was in shock. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't even fucking speak. My parents thought enough was enough, that we had to leave town. But he killed them too. Doused them in gasoline and burnt them in their beds. I remember how they screamed that night. I remember the stench. I remember shivering under the blanket, crying my eyes out, but not being able to do anything. I didn't even have enough strength in my arms to call the cops. I could feel my heart thumping in my chest now. This poor girl. I went to stay with my grandpa, she said. He was the only living family I had, and he killed him too. Blew up his fishing boat. It was awful. I nearly lost my sanity then. Almost decided to throw myself at his mercy just to get it over with, but I just couldn't give up. Couldn't let all those deaths be for nothing. So I ran. I ran away from it all, leaving everything I knew behind, and took to the streets. That bastard, she said, her voice cracking. That demon. He kept finding me. No matter where I went, no matter what I did, he would find me and kill everyone who so much as spoke to me. And I've been running ever since, leaving a trail of blood and broken corpses behind me. That's a horrible story, Victoria. He's a monster. An actual fucking monster. I've seen it with my own eyes. The cops cornered him once, shot him full of holes. I felt so fucking relieved I cried. I was so glad that the nightmare was over, but then this fucker just got up, dusted himself off like it was nothing, and murdered all the cops. All while the blood poured out of the dozens of wounds on his body. And that's when I knew there was no escaping this. There was no escaping him. It's never going to end. Now, this was the moment that would have taken me out of the story. Usually, that is. Over the last couple of weeks, I had seen enough crazy shit to know not to outright dismiss seemingly fantastical tales. And I let her go on. And he's here now, she said, jolting me out of my reverie. I've seen him, in the shadows out of the corner of my eyes. He's caught up to me again, and I'm afraid that carnage is going to happen again. Soon. I need to run away, Natasha. I don't want to, but I have to. Or he's going to start again. A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean you've seen him? Where did you see him, Victoria? Her eyes widened. She sat upright, looked out the window of the restaurant. He's here. Oh God, he's here. What? Now? Are you fucking serious? Yes. Yes, he's right here. She jabbed at the window. I looked outside. It was dark. I couldn't make out anything. He's coming to kill me, Natasha. I looked at the window again, sighing when I saw nothing. Yeah, this girl's a fucking nutcase. Can't believe I just fell for her nonsense. She was probably schizophrenic. Her family was probably alive, too. What a mess. All right, Victoria. Well, let's get you out of here. She shook her head. No, Natasha. We cannot go outside. He's there, waiting for me. We can't go. It'll be fine. I'll protect you. Everything okay over here? The flirty boy on the table to the right asked. I nodded. Yeah, it's fine. She's just feeling a little sick. Might have been the rice. We can't go, Natasha. We can't go, Natasha. We can't. She mumbled. Her body was shivering now. You know, we can help, the boy said. I almost said no, but after seeing how unstable she was acting, I nodded and thanked him. The boy and I put our arms around Victoria and we started walking towards the exit. His friend hurried on ahead of us to go and open the door while I told Cream to pack the food and that I'd be right back. The boy's friend swung the door open, and there stood a man in a trench coat with a shotgun in his hands, and Victoria screamed. A loud boom echoed in the restaurant. The boy's friend flew backwards as his torso was torn open by the shot. His body landed on an elderly man's table, his entrails spilling out on the piping hot kebab. I let go off of Victoria and ran to the left to try and find cover as the boy in all his youthful foolishness charged the murderer. The shotgun racked and then rocked. Another one bellowed out. This one took the boy's head clean off his shoulders. There was complete pandemonium inside the restaurant. People were screaming, running, crawling to get away from the psychopath. The floor was wet, stained with blood as more and more people fell to the shotgun. I jumped over the reception counter as another blast went off, nowhere close to me, thank God. Kareem was here, one hand covering his head, the other dialing the emergency number. More gunshots. My body trembled with each and every one of them. The man was whistling now, his footsteps crunching on gore and shards of glass. I couldn't see Victoria. Where was she? God, I hope she was safe. Tears of fright fell from my eyes. I really should have listened to her. I should have at least tried to leave through the back door. More gunshots, but they were different this time, softer. Pistols. Were the cops here? A new set of footsteps. Whoever it was, they were inside the restaurant. Stay down, bastard. The voice was familiar, but I was too scared to recognize it. Gunfire stopped me from hearing his voice. More shots went off. It sounded like someone was emptying his entire gun. I strained my ears. No sounds of a shotgun going off. Was the murderer losing? What the fuck? Footsteps, frantic, running towards the back door, and another gunshot, the sound of glass breaking. Holy shit, what is that? I finally recognized the voice. Legs shaking, I hoisted myself up on my feet. It was Lil Pimp, Madam's enforcer. With a gun in hand, frightful wonder clear in his eyes, he swung his pistol at me, making me jump back. Holy shit, Natasha, are you okay? I tried to swallow, but there was no spit in my mouth. Yeah, I think so. What the fuck's going on over here? I don't know. I was too shaken to say anything else. Not that I really knew what to say either. How am I supposed to explain any of this? I helped Cream get to his feet. Lil Pimp walked towards us. I was just over at the establishment to check how long the fumigation was going to take. Saw you getting in here, thought I'd later swing by and say hello, but then that fucker walked in and shot the place up, so I came over here running. Thank you, I said, giving him a big hug. Thank you so much. Did you see him? He asked, his voice trembling. Holy shit, Natasha, I shot him like 6 times. Once in the head, and he just got up and ran away. I mean, what the fuck? Kareem started whispering at that. He was praying, I think. Dear God, that meant Victoria was right. Victoria, I said. Where is she? Victoria? Was she here too? He looked surprised. I nodded. You need to help me find her. Other survivors were getting out of their hiding places now. wading through the mess of blood and broken body parts splattered on the floor. But there was no sign of Victoria. We scoured the place. She wasn't there, dead or alive. She was gone. I'm a sex worker, and I've been one for over 10 years now. And this is the story of how I rebelled against my own boss, how I went up against the one who held my hand as I walked into this business, helped me learn the ropes, guided me, protected me when I started working with the strangest freaks. It certainly wasn't the easiest decision to make, because compounding the anxiety and guilt of betraying my benefactor clawing in my chest was the fear twisting my stomach in knots. Fear of turning on the most powerful woman in the city. I had known about the madam being the head of the largest crime ring here for quite a while by then, but this new revelation, that she was so involved in something supernaturally sinister, added a whole new depth to her already intimidating presence. It made me feel like a foolish child flailing around on the loose, wet soil on the bank of a murky lake, believing it to be far more shallow than it really was. But as terrifying as the prospect of her retribution was, the betrayal was a necessity, like a bitter pill that just had to be swallowed. I could either stab her in the back or end up as one of the subjects of whatever god-awful experiment she was running in the establishment, by having those nightmare-inducing worms devour me from the inside out while she observed the whole sordid process through the camera mounted in my private room from the safety of her office. It took Lil Pimp and I weeks to prepare to make a move against her. Most of it can be chalked up to Lil Pimp's justified but exhausting caution that bordered on the overzealous. He didn't fully trust the stalker, and so whatever plans we made with that fucker took twice as long to formulate as they otherwise would have. He also took his sweet time approaching some of the madam's grunts, or soldiers that he believed he could trust. Deciding on how to get them on our side, how much to reveal to each of them seemed to be another insurmountable obstacle. In the end, we agreed to tell most of them that there were moles in the organization who were plotting to kill the madam, and that the highest levels of secrecy were needed to weed them out. Some of them had experienced strange shit themselves, odd sounds emanating from empty spaces, long worms that oozed white pus and sizzled and slipped into thin cracks on the ground, people suddenly behaving in erratic, often violent manner. They knew something was wrong and trusted Little Pimp to uncover it all. We peppered their brains with bits and pieces of the truth. I know I sound impatient, dangerously so, but you can't really blame me. Victoria was missing. Elise was on the verge of being transformed into some worm-like monstrosity, and I was still working. Even after finding hard evidence of some ghastly worm demon walking around the establishment when I broke into it. Pretending that everything was all right was no mean feat. It took everything I had to control my trembling hands and smile through gritted teeth whenever I came across the madam. A headache-removing wave of relief flooded through my body when we finally decided to act. Lil Pimp had been insistent on setting up a base far from the long reach of the madam's all-consuming shadow. A launch pad for our efforts, a safe space we could retreat to if shit got too crazy. It was the stalker who suggested the place, and the sharp twinkle that appeared in Lil Pimp's eyes at its mention let me know we had found our target. The disappearing house. The one with the serial killer. Made perfect sense to get to the root of it all by going back to the place where it all began, right? What better place to hide from the madam than a house that seems to move through space at the command of its owner-occupant? It seemed like the perfect idea. We had numbers on our side, not to mention an immortal monster. And we weren't directly attacking the madam either. Should have been the safest course of action. If only we knew just how much shit would spiral out of control. The stalker took full responsibility of finding the house. He scoured all the brothels in the city, tracked the movements of the girls who did home visits to try to pin down the jack-off murderer. Slowly, patterns started to emerge. Timing of the calls, the kind of girls he'd asked for, and who would eventually disappear. What brothels he'd get in contact with. Locations where the house would pop up at. When the stalker found it, the house was an apartment. The building was small, so small it seemed stunted, malnourished even. as if the construction crew ran out of concrete and just decided to slap together whatever shit they could. It had 4 stories, each smaller than what should be legally permissible. Low ceilings, tiny barred windows, narrow doors that suggested narrower hallways. Crumbling tilted walls slathered with moss, an uncomfortably small yard choked with uncomfortably tall weeds. We were parked about 100 meters away from the building, yet just looking at it, even from all that distance, made me feel nauseous. "This is it, our little bunker," the stalker said, blowing out thick clouds of smoke as he leaned against his battered white van, shotgun resting on the rusted roof. "Are your people ready? They need to be able to move at a moment's notice." "Don't worry about them," Lil Pimp retorted. "They'll be ready. For anything." The stalker raised his eyebrow. "You threatening me right now?" Lil Pimp chuckled derisively. "You can bet your ass on that, motherfucker. You try anything, and I do mean anything. My boys and I will pump you full of so many holes, even your unholy ass won't be able to stitch itself back together." The stalker snarled. "Yeah, that sounds fun." "All right," I snapped. "Put your dicks back in your pants. This is really not the time for a pissing contest. We're on the same side here." I repeated myself, giving Lil Pimp a sharp look. "Because if we aren't, the madam will gobble us up, bone and all. So if neither of you wants to die, I suggest putting your egos aside, at least for the time being." They both grunted in response. A short and awkward pause followed, one that was broken by the shrill ringing of a cell phone. The stalker swiped his thumb on the oily screen of his phone and answered. "Hello? Yes, she's here." "Uh-huh, I'm sending her in." He ended the call and smiled at me. "The horny bastard's waiting for you." I nodded, took a deep breath, and adjusted my blonde wig. "Okay, let's do this." "All right," Lil Pimp said, checking his pistol for ammo. "Let's go. And don't worry, I'm right behind you." "I'm not worried," I said, and that was a total lie. "Awesome," the stalker replied, sliding his shotgun off the roof of his van. "Proceed then. I'll come up from the street on the eastern side and blow that asshole's head off if he tries to pull something." He didn't wait for a reply and slipped off into an unlit alley crammed between 2 buildings to our left. I waited for the sound of his footsteps to get fainter before walking towards the building. The area we were in was a low-income neighborhood. Too many people jammed into too many houses all built too close to each other. It should have been loud, even at that odd hour, but the fact that it was deathly silent was more than a little unnerving. Maybe the residents here had seen Lil Pimp's heavily armed friends moving through the streets and had sensed that a storm was coming, one that was best avoided as much as possible. A dog's guttural barks pierced the silence as I strode towards the building. I could hear Lil Pimp behind me, gliding from car to utility pole to overflowing garbage bin, never once stepping out of the shadows. To my far left and right, Lil Pimp's men moved towards the house. I spotted the stalker with them as well. The short metal gate of the apartment building swung open with a prolonged groan. Déjà vu. The serial killer was waiting for me. I bit my lip, hoping my wig would be enough to fool him. If he recognized me as the girl who attacked him with pepper spray and ran away, he was likely to rush back into the building and teleport himself off to somewhere far beyond our reach. And that would be a problem. The stalker had said we should just use a different girl for the initial contact, but I was against it. There was no way I was dragging someone else into this shit. Maybe it was the wrong decision. I was certainly rethinking my stance as I got closer to the house. "Samantha, right?" My mouth dried up. I recognized that voice. It was flatter, more emotionless than when I'd last met him, but it was undoubtedly him. "Yeah," I replied, deliberately making my voice a little hoarse, but not so ridiculously so. "That's me." "Well, come on in." I frowned at the robot-like monotony of his voice, but didn't have the time to contemplate on its implications, because right that very second, he took a step forward. A frightened scream escaped my mouth before I could stop myself. His eyes had been gouged out, and in those wet, pulpy holes, the white worms writhed like maggots. His jaw had been ripped clean off. His fat, black tongue flapped round on his neck. "Well, what are you waiting for?" he asked. I don't know how, but he did. He didn't have the necessary tools to vocalize his thoughts, yet that didn't seem to stop him. Lil Pimp walked out from behind a car, aiming his gun at this monster. But before he could pull the trigger, the door to the building was thrown open, and dozens of these undead worm-infested zombies tumbled out like clutter from a neglected closet. They trampled on one another as they tried to rush towards me. Then a sharp crack. A hole opened up in the serial killer's forehead. His head snapped back and then effortlessly moved back into position. Holy shit, Lil Pimp swore. The serial killer lunged at me, caught me by my wrists, and began dragging me towards the house, even as I screeched my lungs off. Sounds of chaotic gunfire filled the neighborhood as the jack-off murderer's undead comrades funneled past me and charged Lil Pimp. The stalker and the other men joined the fray, emptying their guns into these things that just refused to lay down. I dug my fingernails into the arms of my captor, tore off the very rotting flesh from his bones, but he refused to let me go. I was stunned at his incredible strength. My knees bumped against the 3 stairs that led to the building as he tossed me inside. The door slammed shut behind me with a resounding boom, and the sound of gunfire was immediately muffled, as if it was coming from the other side of town. I winced as I rubbed my arms. Shit. Had he somehow sent me off to somewhere else? What was happening? I heard something thumping against the door from the other side, like a body was thrown against it. And then more gunshots. Okay, good. We were still there. The inside of the building was just unnaturally quiet. I tried to force open the door, but it wouldn't budge. I turned around, sucking in quick, shallow breaths. The hallway was long, narrow, lit up faintly yellow from the glow emanating from the candelabras mounted on both the walls. At the end of the hallway was something that turned my blood into ice. This thing was vaguely humanoid, about 8 feet tall, pale skin that was flaking off brown bones, wispy white hair capping an unnaturally large skull, long, thin limbs, a large bulging stomach. It was standing, hunched, facing me, with its arms raised and brushing against the low ceiling. The scuffed floorboards creaked as it took a long and threatening step towards me. I backed up instinctively, pressing up against the door. Gunfire continued unabated outside. The violence there seemed so much better than whatever it was that I was facing. The thing walking towards me growled. A harsh, raspy thing, and I whimpered. One more step. Wow, was this really how I was going to die? No, there must be something I can still do. I need to think. And then another step. The distance between us was reduced by half. This thing's strides were long. The sound of bare feet slapping against the hardwood floor distracted this monstrosity. What now? What else was coming? Bright flames flared somewhere behind the monster. It turned and I caught a glimpse at who joined us. It was Victoria, holding up a stick, with a flaming rag tied on one end. She waved that stick around in that thing's face, forcing it to the side. Her face was covered in sweat, her wet hair clinging to her face and neck. She jabbed the stick at the thing again and moved between us. Natasha, she said, her voice tense. Start walking towards me. My mouth dropped open. What was she doing here? Now, please. Not thinking it wise to question her right then, I obliged. My knees shaking, I took a couple of tentative steps towards her. My eyes fixed on the hulking monstrosity snarling and snapping its broken teeth at the wavering flame. The first door to your left, Victoria said. Open it and walk in. My hand quickly grasped the dusty knob on the door and twisted it. I pushed the door open and pretty much jumped in. Fuck it, Victoria said and tossed the stick at the thing and ran towards me. The tall beast let out an anguished field screech, and it sounded like a hawk dragging its claws on a chalkboard. She slammed the door shut behind her, placed her head against it, and took a couple of breaths to calm herself down. Holy shit, Victoria. What's going on here? We were inside a small apartment. It had been completely sealed off. Windows were barred and boarded up and painted black. Not even a sliver of light filtered in from the outside. Thank God for the hundreds of candles that stood and burned on each flat surface here. A major fire hazard, for sure. But at least I wasn't totally in the dark. In the literal sense, that is. Natasha, Victoria said, her eyes wide. Thank God you're here. What are you talking about? You have to help me. It's her, the madam. She's working with my stalker. You have to help me stop them. They're going to destroy the city. I'm a sex worker, and have been one for over a decade now. And if there's one thing I've learned over the years is that sometimes this line of work can be dangerous, especially when you've chosen to work with freaks like I have in the city that I live in. You can never really know who's just a sexual deviant and who's an actual monster. You try your hardest to keep yourself safe, but the threat is always there, like a leopard hiding in the bushes, ready to pounce on you and sink its teeth into your neck when you're not paying attention. I have always been aware of this fact. God knows I've wondered how many of my clients have dead bodies stuffed into their freezers, whole or in pieces. Yet it never fails to shock me every time that I come across them. Murderers, monsters. Now, I've had my fair share of encounters with them. Needless to say, it's always been a harrowing experience, even when I haven't had to fight for my life, when I haven't had to escape with the skin of my teeth. Just witnessing the extent of violence that a human being is capable of inflicting on another has been enough to sear some crippling trauma onto my brain. It's been bad enough that I've painstakingly come up with all the possible ways I can react in such situations. How to calm these fuckers down when they're agitated, how to map out escape routes and actually use them under duress. I've gone above and beyond to ensure that I never end up running into one of these beasts, and if I do, that I at least have the best possible chance of making it out alive. Never even in my wildest dreams could I have imagined that I would make a conscious decision to sit down with one of them. But that's exactly what I did. When my friend and Madam's enforcer, Lil Pimp, called me up to tell me that he'd found the man in the trench coat, I knew I had to meet him. Because, well, let's see. He'd been stalking another girl at the establishment, an acquaintance of mine, Victoria, for years, going so far as shooting up a restaurant she and I were at. And that poor girl had been missing ever since. He's invincible. Lil Pimp shot him 6 times, once in the head even, and this motherfucker just got up and ran away like it was nothing. He had somehow captured Elise, another one of my coworkers, whose body had been taken over by a demonic worm. The man in the trench coat was at the center of all the weird shit that had been happening around me, and that's why I knew that if I had to get any answers, if I wanted to save either Victoria or Elise, I would have to push my fears down and have a chat with the serial-killing stalker zombie. I knew it was going to be bad. That shit was going to go sideways. And it did. Just not in the way I had imagined. Not even close. The warehouse was located a couple miles off the old highway that brushed the northern edge of the city before descending down the wooded valley. The building was a dilapidated old thing, barely holding itself together against the forces of time and neglect. Vines crawled up its sides as strong gusts of wind beat against its walls, slipped in through the cracks and nudged at exposed bricks to try and dislodge them. Broken beer bottles and used syringes littered the overgrown yard. It was a shithole. Perfect place for someone like the stalker to hide in. "You ready?" Lil Pimp asked as he turned the engine of his car off, the tattoos on his arms appearing to ripple in the shadows. "Not really," I admitted. "I don't want to meet this guy. In fact, I'd like to stay as far away from him as I possibly can. And yet you're going to do this anyway." "Well, what choice do we have?" I asked, shaking my head. I did, though. I could just forget about it and walk away. Why put myself in danger for Victoria, who I didn't even like it all that much, and for Elise, who I barely even knew? "Still can't believe you actually spoke to this asshole," I said. "I mean, what were you even thinking? That you could just have a casual chat with this undead psychopath?" "Well, he just snuck up on me, okay?" Lil Pimp said defensively. "What was I supposed to do? Shoot him? We know how that goes." I took a deep breath, let it really fill up my lungs. "Okay, let's do this." Without giving myself the chance to rethink all this, I climbed out of the car and started walking towards the warehouse, my heels rapping smartly on the pothole-infested asphalt. Lil Pimp was right behind me, giving me some confidence with his imposing presence and his large holster slung over his large shoulders. But it wasn't enough. One gun would not stop the stalker. "I wish we had told the madam about this," I said as we neared the gate. "He insisted that I not talk to anyone else about our meeting, said it would be in our best interest," Lil Pimp pointed out. "Yeah, well, maybe you shouldn't have listened. Would be far more reassuring to have more men with guns running around." He snorted. "It's too late for that now." I opened my mouth to retort, but we were already at the wide doors leading into the warehouse. Lil Pimp placed his hand on the latch and pulled it back with a screeching metallic noise. He pushed the door open with an equally terrible groan. The stalker was inside. He was lighting a cigarette while sitting on top of what looked to be a large coffin placed in the center of the empty, dust-riddled floor of the warehouse. Moonlight shot in through the shattered windows, providing a sliver of illumination, enough to see the face of the man. He was middle-aged, bald, wore round glasses, and had a bushy caterpillar mustache. Had the trench coat, and he basically looked like what you would think a registered sex offender would look like. Gross. "I'm so glad that you decided to come, Natasha," he spoke in a smooth voice which softly echoed in the empty building. My heart was pounding in my chest. The last time I had seen him, he had been trying to blow my head off with a shotgun. The very same shotgun that now rested on the coffin next to him. I stopped a good distance away from him. "I'm afraid you're the only one who's happy to be here." He smiled, took a long drag from his cigarette, and jumped off the coffin. Lil Pimp reached for his pistol. "Easy, easy," the stalker said, putting his hands up in a placating gesture. "I'm not looking for a fight, and you know that." "Well, you can forgive me for being a little cautious," Lil Pimp retorted. "That's understandable. After all, we did meet under less than ideal circumstances, didn't we? But I can assure you, once again, that I pose absolutely no threat to you. I just want to talk." "I'm not interested," I shot back. "Just tell us where she is. Elise. Where are you keeping her?" "Right here," he said, kicking the coffin with his heel. I froze. "She's inside that thing?" "Yeah. Alive, too. Sedated for now. You can see her if you want. I must warn you, though. It's not a pretty sight." I chewed my lip as I thought about what this guy's motivations were. Why did he bring me out here? What did he want with Elise? Wanting some answers, I nodded. "Okay. Open it up. Let us see." I shot a glance at Lil Pimp, and together we started walking towards the stalker, who turned around and popped the coffin open with a gentle click. From this distance, I couldn't see what was inside it, but I could smell it. It was rancid, like spoiled milk rotting in the crevices of an old refrigerator. The stench grew stronger, and the closer we got to the coffin, I could practically taste the vomit on my tongue, even as my eyes started to water. Filthy. The clicking of my heels echoed in the warehouse as I approached the coffin. Then I saw Elise and nearly screamed in fright. Beads of cold sweat butted on my forehead as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Meanwhile, Lil Pimp clamped his hand on his mouth to stop himself from retching. Elise was melting. Her flesh was turning into some strange white gooey substance as her skin stretched around it like thick films of gossamer. Her face was all mushed up, the bones trying to fuse with each other. She was almost unrecognizable. But that wasn't even the worst part. No, that was the legs. They were melting into each other, with thin dark rings extending from her hip to the tips of her toes. The lower half of her body seemed to have the texture of a carapace. Seemed to, because I wouldn't dare touch that shit. Lil Pimp groaned. "Good God," I said, my voice trembling. "It's like she's turning into some worm monster, right?" the stalker said, but I wouldn't dare to. "It's a failed experiment. She probably thought she could control this one, but I guess the spell isn't quite perfect yet. That actually works in our favor, however, because that means there's still time. We can save your friend here, but of course you will need to help me find her." Wait. Slow down," I said. Well, yelled it more like. "What are you talking about? Find who?" He pulled the top of the coffin down and snapped it shut. "Oh, you know. The one responsible for all this." "Who?" "Our mutual friend," he replied. I shuffled on my feet. "Wait. You mean Victoria?" And he nodded. I stared at him open-mouthed. "Are you kidding me? Are you actually saying that she's the one behind all this shit? Her? Victoria? The girl you've been stalking for who knows how long? The girl you tried to kill in front of me? The night when you shot innocent people in the face in the restaurant we were at? My dress was soaked with their blood. You really think I'm gonna believe this shit?" I shot a look of disbelief at Lil Pimp, who seemed sick. The stalker smirked, and I could see the malice in his glinting teeth. It made me shudder. Yep, that Victoria. The one I failed at killing that night. Look, man, you're crazy. No, look, I'm not asking you for your blind faith here. I just want you to keep an open mind. Can you do that? Oh, this should be great, I said, putting up a facade of bravado while my heart quaked in fear. I can't wait to see how you're going to spin this. He smiled, then turned and strolled towards the window to his right. Let the moonlight wash over him as he exhaled small puffs of smoke. Motes of dust swirled in the moonlit air in front of him. Do you know when she first arrived in this city? I shrugged. A couple months ago. And the weird shit started happening around you shortly afterwards, didn't it? He asked, whirling back around. Like you suddenly started getting more and more acquainted with the supernatural. I waited for him to continue. I'm going to take that as a yes. So she arrives here, and just like that, he snapped his fingers. She's recruited by your madam, right? Yeah, that's exactly what happened. While unfortunate, it isn't exactly unusual for runaways to join this business, I pointed out. Especially when they're being chased by a psychopath and will do whatever it takes to survive. He ignored the jab. Of course, it isn't unusual, but Victoria isn't your average runaway, is she? Sure, she presents like it, scared, lost, confused, kinda dumb. Am I getting that right? I nodded begrudgingly. So she joins your brothel, and that's when things start to go wrong. Other whores around her, pardon my French, start encountering things that by all accounts shouldn't exist. Like serial killers in vanishing houses, for example. My eyes widened. How do you know about that? He smiled. Because I've been keeping an eye on you, Natasha, very closely in fact. And not just you, but anyone close to her. Because she's a threat to all of you. Because she kills people indiscriminately if it would get her closer to what she wants. Fuck off, I snapped. You accuse her of trying to kill people indiscriminately when I saw you actually doing that with my own eyes. I had no choice, he said through gritted teeth. Victoria is dangerous. The things that she's done to me, if you knew half of it, you'd never sleep for the rest of your life. I will do whatever it takes to put that bitch down, even if it means killing anyone unfortunate enough to come in the way. I noticed the hateful madness in his eyes and backed up a little. You're a lunatic, Low Pimp muttered. Like I said, the stalker continued after calming himself down a bit. I'm not asking for blind faith here. I'm just giving you the opportunity to figure this out for yourself, because when you do, you'll be more than willing to help me kill her. What are you talking about? I asked. He shook his head in irritation. Can't you see it yet? There's a reason why she's here, stirring up all this trouble. The worms and everything else. That little witch is trying to do something here. Now what that is, I don't know, but I'm willing to bet your madam is involved in it, whatever it is. The madam? Low Pimp asked, eyebrows stretched in disbelief. Of course, the stalker replied, running his hand over his naked scalp. You've been working with her for a while now. You know how powerful she is. You think anything goes on around here without her knowledge? Come on. Low Pimp gawped at him, not knowing how to respond to that. This all sounds an awful lot like baseless bullshit, I remarked. And the fact that it's coming from someone who kills people in restaurants and holds sick girls in coffins makes me not want to give it a second thought. Then go find the evidence, he said. Break into your madam's office. You're sure to find something that'll connect her to Victoria. I would have done it myself, but I was too hasty. Thought I could kill the slippery little bitch in the restaurant itself. Big mistake. Now all the police in the city are after me. I can't just walk around like nothing happened. I need your help. Lil Pimp was shaking next to me, and I could see why. The madam had been good to him, looked after him when his parents died in a plane crash. He thought of her as a mother. The idea that she would be involved in evil shit like this was unfathomable to him. Her running a gang that was involved in prostitution and the drug trade notwithstanding. Not to mention the prospect of going against someone as powerful as her was nerve-wracking all by itself. We're gonna need some time to think about this, I said as I patted Lil Pimp's shoulders. Well, you don't have a lot of time. She doesn't have a lot of time. He jabbed his thumb at the coffin. I can save her, but only if I can find out what exactly Victoria did to her. Let us think about it. Think fast. The clock is ticking. You don't actually believe him, do you? Lil Pimp asked as we exited the warehouse. I shivered as the cold wind brushed against my skin. Not really, but what does he gain from lying? I don't know. He finds a way to get closer to Victoria, I guess. He doesn't know where she is either and maybe thinks that you can help find her. That she'll get in touch with you and he can pounce on the opportunity. That's possible, likely even, but what if he's telling the truth? Lil Pimp shook his head. There's no way. Just no fucking way. The madam's not involved. She wouldn't do this. I know her. I too believe that he's lying, but what if he isn't? I don't know, Natasha. He was breathing quite heavily at this point. Why don't we just go talk to her? Seems more reasonable to trust over that guy. No way. If she is the one behind all this, she'll have us killed the moment we tell her that we suspect her. Compared to her, he's way more manageable. Really? He asked, shocked. You don't think sneaking around her back is just as dangerous? No, it is, I admitted. But we have to do this. Trust, but verify, right? I'll sneak into her office, and if we don't find anything, we'll come back and just beat the truth out of him. We may not be able to kill him, but we can sure put the hurt on him. He nodded reluctantly. Okay. Yeah, we could do that. I paused. I can trust you on this, right? What? I know how much the madam means to you, but if we are to do this, if we are to get to the truth, I can't have you stabbing me in the back. He looked offended. For crying out loud, Natasha. No, I'm not going to betray my best friend. How can you even ask me that? Okay then, I said, sucking in a deep breath. Time to break into our boss's office. This was going to be a disaster, wasn't it? I'm a sex worker. Have been for over a decade now. 10 years. Seems like an eternity, doesn't it? Well, to me it doesn't. To me it feels like it was just yesterday that I sauntered into the madam's office and demanded to be put on the roster. I was young, arrogant, reckless, thought I was hot shit, that I knew my way around these streets and that I could easily handle someone like the madam. Oh, how wrong I was. I still wince every time I think about how rude and arrogant I had been when I first met her. Thankfully, she was amused by my stupidity and hired me on the spot instead of shooting me in the back of the head and burying my corpse in the wet cement at the nearest construction site. See, because she deliberately kept a low profile, I was unaware of who she truly was. I thought that she was just the owner of a small brothel, not that she ran the largest criminal organization in the city. Drugs, weapons, gambling, human trafficking. The madam's thick fingers were curled into each and every pie that was baked in the city, away from the weak and congested nose of the law. You couldn't even mug someone in the red light area without her permission. Hell, there were even rumors that she ordered the assassination of the mayor in 2007. She was so dangerous that going up against her was every bit as daunting as getting into a fight with Victoria's immortal stalker. More, I'd say. And yet that is exactly what I had decided to do. With all the strange supernatural shit going on around me, I knew that I couldn't just ignore the stalker's warning that the madam was somehow involved in all of this. The question would gnaw at the back of my mind, chewing, grinding, scratching, driving me to the brink of insanity. Unless, of course, I didn't end up being killed by some unnatural monstrosity that was supposedly only around us because of her. And that's the reason why, after careful consideration, Lil Pimp and I decided to break into the madam's office. It took us a couple of weeks to prepare for it. Her office was tucked away in a dark corner on the top floor of the building that was the establishment. It was kept locked shut when she wasn't using it, while a couple of CCTV cameras kept watch on the narrow corridor leading up to it. At least 6 guards patrolled the perimeter of the building when it was shut for business at 4 a.m., before opening back up at 7:30 a.m. Business was slow during the day, but not non-existent. Each night at 3 a.m. on the dot, the madam would hole up in her office and go over the books along with the accountant, a nervous, bespectacled little man who was, well, her accountant. Meanwhile, us girls would begin trickling out of the building after a night of hard, often soft work. After being satisfied that every cent was recorded in the correct column, the madam would leave the building and retreat to her house, accompanied by the accountant and her lieutenant, Razor. No prizes for guessing why the most ruthless man in her organization was referred to by that name. He would lock up the building behind him and hand the keys over to Lil Pimp, who was in charge of the security until Razor came back in the morning at 9 a.m. after dropping the madam and the accountant to their houses. No one knew where he lived or how he survived with such little sleep. But seeing how intimidating the 6.5-foot tall man was, no one bothered to ask. Therefore, Lil Pimp and I had a very short window where we could potentially break into her office and look for whatever it was that we were looking for. Not having a specific thing to search for meant that we would need even more time in the office itself, further complicating the task. Lil Pimp was understandably nervous about this. The madam took him in when he was an orphan, starving on the streets. Gave him food, shelter, and a gun. Turned him into a weapon. Or gave him a purpose, as he likes to say it. It certainly wasn't easy for him to decide to sneak around behind her back, but seeing a girl slowly transform into a worm-like monster is a hell of a motivation to try and betray your mother figure, who also happens to be the most powerful woman in the city. And that's the reason why that cold, wet night found me leaning against the damp wall of the unlit alley, less than 100 meters away from the establishment. A homeless man snored as a dog rummaged through plastic garbage bags somewhere behind me. The road was oily with spent rain, and I could hear angry shouting and shoes splashing in puddles. Drunk men fighting. I ignored them. My complete attention was on the building. On the other side of the road, Lil Pimp stood near the gate of the establishment, smoking a cigarette with another guard under the dull glow of a streetlight. I waited for Lil Pimp to give me the signal with my fingers wrapped tight around the office keys in my hand. They weren't the original ones hanging from the madam's neck, of course, just copies forged from a soap impression. I have no idea how Lil Pimp managed to pull that off. I didn't ask. I watched as he tossed the cigarette aside, yawned, and stretched his arms above his head. There, the signal. I pulled the hoodie off my sweatshirt above my head and crossed the street. I couldn't see where the other guards were, but that signal meant that the path was clear for me to sneak in through the back door. There was no other option but to trust him. Out of the corner of my eye, I spied the two drunk men I'd heard fighting just moments ago. Lil Pimp and the guard were laughing at them. Good. I jogged across the street, quickly easing myself against the wall of the pharmacy next to the establishment. I glided along the wet wall, shivered as the cold water seeped through my clothes. As I reached the sharp corner, I popped my head out from behind the wall and peered into the alley separating the establishment with the building housing the pharmacy. A lone light fixed on the wall cast a yellow spotlight on the ground. There was no one there. Heart beating hard in my chest, I entered the alley. A row of dirt-speckled sash windows passed over my head as I made my way towards the back of the building. The smell wafting out of the gaps beneath the windows itself suggested what kind of place it was. Traces of cheap perfume, damp mold, and the stale stench of old sex made me turn my nose in disgust. I reached the corner that turns to the back of the building, leaned against blackened drain pipes that were still dripping water. From this position, I could see the exact spot where Elise had crash-landed when she'd been possessed by the worms. The commercial square was dark and forlorn, with the only light being a couple of rapidly blinking streetlights, the rest having been switched off. By the guards, no doubt. The madam owned every shop here. After taking a second to scan my surroundings and making sure that no one was there to spot me, I took a deep breath and began running towards the back door of the building, inwardly wincing as my shoes loudly splashed on a puddle along the way. No one better have heard that. I picked up speed, hoping to beat any would-be pursuers to the punch, jumping 2 stone steps at a time to reach the back door. The keys jiggled in my trembling hands as I tried to slide one into the lock fixed on the doorframe. I turned it fruitlessly, pulled it out, and slapped another one in. Snippets of agitated conversation drifted towards me. The guards, they were coming. The time Lil Pimp had bought me was running out. I plugged another key in. Through the gap between the bushes and the trees that rose up and stormed the walls, I saw one of the guards walking towards me, arguing with someone to his right, probably another guard. I swear I heard something. You sure you did? The 4th key turned, successfully this time. I almost cried with relief as the door swung open soundlessly. I could kiss the guy who oiled the hinges. Quickly stepping into the building, I swung the door shut behind me with a soft click. Instantly, I was thrown in darkness. Not even a sliver of light peeked in through the gaps in the wooden slats. My instinct screamed at me to take my phone out and light up the surroundings, but I ignored them, for I could still hear the guards. They were right outside, talking shit to each other. Their voices were faint, but I could hear them. I crouched and I listened. I told you. Yeah, you delusional prick. Well, better safe than sorry, right? Wouldn't want the madam to find out we were slacking on the job. Their voices grew fainter, distant. They were walking away. Only when they had completely faded away did I take my phone out. I didn't dare use the flashlight feature. Too bright. I simply held the home screen open and used the weak light to illuminate my surrounding. I was standing in a long hallway. Rows of doors, both old and new, were set into the walls on either side. Without the presence of the girls and their clients, they had a very intimidating presence. Seemed to me that I didn't belong there. I shook my head to clear my mind of the cobwebs of paranoia. All right, time to move. I took a couple of slow, measured steps towards the front of the building, towards the staircase. The darkness was thick around me, and it felt like the shadows were beating against the light from my phone, trying to snuff it out. The air was thick, wrapped around my throat, and licked at my nostrils with its foul stench. It was unbearably vile. I knew that the cleaning staff only came around in the mornings, but this shit was far too obnoxious. Like a pipe had burst in the walls somewhere, flooding the bricks with thick sewage. I stretched an arm out, brushed my fingers against the wall to try and maintain my balance as I stumbled through the darkness that was ever so weakly pushed back by my phone. The building was silent, with the only sound in it being my breathing and the shuffling of my shoes. About a minute later, I reached the end of the hallway. It branched off into two different paths, to my left and my right. I was at the front of the building. Broad windows that gazed out onto the streets adorned the wall before me. But they did nothing to the darkness as their iron shutters had been pulled down. I went left, carefully scanning the wall to my left for the opening that contained the staircase. I found it soon enough. It was slightly better illuminated than the rest of the building. There was a window on the wall at the landing between the ground and the first floor. This one had been boarded up, but the wooden panel was cracked, allowing soft moonlight to come in. We were very close to a full moon, yet the white glow felt like the lance of an angel stabbing into the heart of hell. I placed my hand on the grimy handrail and started climbing the stone stairs, taking care not to stumble and fall. A cracked jaw would be quite inconvenient in such a situation. When I reached the landing of the first floor, I stopped. The hallway that snaked off to the right was the one that led to the madam's office. There were CCTV cameras placed there. I had no idea if they were working or not. I had to be careful. Biting my lip, I tiptoed my way to the wall that was part of the area housing the stairwell and peeked into the hallway. No red pinpricks of light winked back at me. Fuck yes. I rushed down the hallway, which grew darker and darker. This was the most protected part of the building. The rooms lining the walls of this hallway were never used by the girls. The one directly opposite to the madam's office was used by the accountant. The one next to it belonged to Razor and his most trusted men. I hurried past them and went straight for the Queen's throne room itself. The door was just like the others. The only thing that stood out about it was the heavy padlock. This time, I got the right key on the first try. I blinked once and took the lock off before pulling the latch back. Pushing the door open, I stepped into the room and swept my phone in front of me. The room was a mess. There was a small wooden desk with a mess of old, musty papers laid out on top of it, surrounding a dust-riddled CRT monitor. On the wall in front of me was a sink, the tap encrusted with limescale. To its left, a small iron cabinet. The floor was carpeted and had dark stains of piss and petrified black rice of mouse droppings suspended in furs of gray dust. Baseboards brown with filth and neglect lined the corners. The place had an outward air of poverty, but anyone who knew the truth knew that it was all deliberate. A disguise. I walked around the table and sat on the madam's chair, deciding to rifle through the papers on the desk when my eyes were drawn to the monitor. The power light was on. I pulled out the drawer beneath the top of the desk, put my hand on the mouse, moved it. After a couple of agonizing seconds, the screen came to life, and I almost screamed at the sight. Live video recordings from the rooms in the building. every room that the girls worked in. My stomach churned. I hadn't noticed these cameras. They were all cleverly hidden. The madam was recording our sessions without our knowledge. Why? To sell them? This made no sense. A lot of the girls would be willing to do it for their own free will, so why go to the extent of hiding this from us? To prevent us from asking for a commission? No, couldn't be. She had far more efficient streams of revenue. Then what else? Could it have something to do with Victoria? Was the stalker right? Was the madam working with her on something? Something that required keeping an eye on our sessions? Holy shit, maybe it was an experiment. Have us work with strange clients and keep records of weird shit we go through. My heart trembled in fear as I started going through the papers on the desk. They were useless. Torn papers from phone books, menus of restaurants, and more nonsense. Just decoys to hide the real prize. I had to check the cabinet, yes. Just then I heard something that froze my spine. Footsteps. Frantic outside in the hallway. Boots rapping on the concrete floor, echoing in the long hallway. Fuck. Could one of the guards have come inside the building to check if something was wrong? I slid down the chair and hid beneath the desk. The footsteps grew closer, louder, angrier, stopped in front of the door. My breath caught my chest as I waited. The latch rattled around, but the door didn't move, but somehow terrified me even more because I hadn't locked the door from my side. So who was out there, and why the fuck weren't they charging in? I heard a bang, and then another bang. Meaty palms were slapped on the door, but it never opened. What the hell? Footsteps again, faster, much faster, so fast it was almost unnatural, loud like gunshots. The person outside was running away from me. I heard the distant sound of their footsteps on the stairs before they ended abruptly. I sat there, curled up in a ball, frightened out of my wits for over 15 minutes. Had no idea what had just happened, no idea what to make of any of it. Finally, when it felt like things were quiet again, I risked coming out from my hiding spot. My legs wobbled as I went towards the door, and with great trepidation pulled it open. I clamped my hand on my mouth when I noticed what was down there on the ground, but deciding that there was no time to dwell on it, so I sidestepped it and went down the hallway. The journey to the outside of the building was incredibly harrowing, but I somehow made my way out, without encountering whatever the fuck it was that had come so close to finding me. After exiting the establishment, I slumped against the mossy wall of the alley and heaved a tremendous sigh of relief. I was out and still alive. I then realized I had to find Lil Pimp as soon as possible and tell him about everything. About the cameras, about the strange thing I witnessed, but most importantly, about the worms I saw crawling on the floor, outside the madam's office. I'm a sex worker. Have been one for over 10 years now. And in those long years, I've had sessions at a wide variety of places, in tiny rooms of dingy motels and in royal suites of luxury hotels, in wet back seats of cars that smell of cigarettes and stale body odor, and on poolside lounge chairs in spacious mansions. Frankly, I've fucked in every place where two people can possibly get it on, in this city, that is. But nothing, and I do mean nothing, beats the brothel, fondly known as the establishment. It might not have the comfort of a 7-star hotel or the glittering view of Widow's Point on Slouching Hill at the edge of the valley, but it more than makes up for it in terms of safety and familiarity. To be surrounded by men with guns who are paid to protect you, and by girls who know what it's like to be you, really puts your heart at ease. Helps you prepare for the messed up shit your screwed up client wants you to do, and our madam was the cherry on top. We were lucky to have someone like her who treated us so well, maybe even respected a little. That's why it was such a great relief that the establishment opened back up 3 weeks after the abhorrent worm incident. Home visits were fine, but it was the establishment that I performed my best. Even my clients could sense that. Some of them told me that the sessions felt a little off as I hadn't been fully into it. Broke their immersion, hurt the quality of the service. That really annoyed me because I had only gotten as far as I had by giving my clients as authentic of an experience as they had imagined in their fantasies. Really, it felt good to be back, Damp walls, cracked tiled floor, and the sound of traffic rushing in through the windows. It all brought a smile to my face. With all the craziness of the past couple weeks, it was a relief to be back to a relatively mundane routine. However, I should have crossed my fingers before counting my blessings. Too much crazy shit had happened in the past couple of weeks, and I had been a little too enthusiastic in forgetting all about it. Serial killers and disappearing houses, gangrenous dicks, an invincible monster hunting a friend who was still missing. I had made a conscious decision to shove it all in a dark corner of my mind. Why? I don't know. Maybe I was trying to protect myself, felt that my sanity would start to fray like an old cotton rag if I let myself think too deeply about shit that was far out of my control. Maybe it all just terrified me. Like I said, I don't know. I'm not really good with all that introspection stuff. It was a mistake, of course. You can sweep shit under the rug all you like. Doesn't mean it won't stink up your house. And it did. Stunk up my house in a major way, that is. Started the very night we moved back into the establishment, the night which marked the beginning of the worm-pocalypse. It happened just after my third appointment that night. The wet smell of bodily fluids had started to replace the chemical stench of fumigation. I was glad the latter was dissipating, as every little whiff was reminding me of that fucked up sight I had witnessed along with Victoria, that poor girl. I hadn't even seen her since the night her demon stalker shot up the Lebanese restaurant across the street. Where was she? I hoped she was safe. As my client pulled his pants back up, I decided to go out to the balcony for a smoke. I threw on my black robe, took the pack of cigarettes and lighter out of the bedside drawer, and padded across the room towards the balcony. I'm using the term balcony very loosely here. It was a cramped little extension of the fire escape that connected all the rooms on that floor. But there was enough space to stand there at least. Enough to lean against the metal railing and feel the wind on your face. The view wasn't all that shabby either. A commercial area was splayed out behind the establishment, some liquor shops, some restaurants, a pharmacy, a boutique, and a salon. I shivered as I stepped out on the balcony, popped a cigarette in my mouth, and lit it. As I took a long drag on it, I noticed someone else was out there, next to the door of the room to the left of mine. It was Elise, another girl working at the establishment. The last time I had seen her was when I had accompanied her to the madam's office after a portion of the roof above her room had collapsed on top of her. She had seemed dazed then. Like what had just happened didn't register to her. I thought she was in shock. How was she doing now? Hey, I greeted, exhaling thick plumes of smoke. She was naked, standing next to the door on the tip of her toes, like a ballerina. Her arms were high above her head, touching the ceiling. You should really put some clothes on, you know? Don't want to catch a cold, I said. And that would certainly affect her earnings, by the way. Not enough perverts out there who get off to the taste of snot, I'm afraid. She didn't respond, just whirled ever so slightly away from me. Elise? Are you okay? No response. Her fingers caressed the ceiling, drew particular patterns in the dust. Was she high? Elise, I repeated, louder this time. She froze, as if she'd suddenly turned into a statue. She obviously heard me, but wasn't responding. A cold breeze brushed my spine, making me shiver. I opened my mouth to call out to her again, but stopped myself, because she moved. She bent her head, moved it downwards, slowly, almost cautiously, until her chin rested on her chest. I saw that her mouth was open, locked in an O shape. I could see her right eye from this angle. It was wide open, eyelids sliding back, almost sinking into the socket. And then she swung her neck, sharply, until her eyes were locked onto mine. I gasped. There was a worm moving in her left eyeball. Long, fat, so fat it looked like it would pop right out, slithered around her pupil like a snake circling a rock. The unnerving sight turned my stomach into knots. Holy shit. She leaned forward, just the upper body. Her arms were still fixed on the ceiling as she stayed on her tiptoes. The fact that she was maintaining balance in such an odd position was simply unbelievable. Her left arm left the ceiling, dropped down to her side lifelessly. A hollow metallic thunk rang out as Elise fell forward, her head smashing into the metal railing of the fire escape as she crashed to the floor. Fuck, Elise, I exclaimed. I dropped down to my knees and reached towards her to try and help her up. I recoiled in shock as her body jerked and shifted onto her side, almost in a spastic motion. Left hand shot up and grabbed at the railing, then her right leg swung up and over her head, before looping around her arm. She thrust her head into the gap between her thigh and calf. Her right arm blindly tried to grab for something. What was she doing? It was almost as if she couldn't control her body. Good God, was it because of the worm? Was she losing control over her own muscles because of it? Was she, and I shuddered at the thought, going to suffer the same fate as the man with the explosive problem? I could hear her breathing. It was sharp, shallow, raspy, sounded like a dozen holes had been punched through her lungs. Elise, come on. Let's get you out of this mess. She answered by further tightening her limbs around herself. She was tying herself into knots, literally. I moved once again to wrap my arms around her. It made her snarl. I jumped back. A horrific thought crossed my mind. I imagined her sinking her teeth into my arm and the worm leaving her body, traveling into mine and conquering my brain. It scared me so much I contemplated not helping her at all. Easy, I'm not going to hurt you. Then, with frighteningly Herculean strength, she hoisted herself up until she was sitting on top of the rusted metal railing, which groaned and swayed under her weight. Her head was still locked inside her leg, slightly tilted as she stared off into the distance with eyes that just refused to blink. Elise, you need to move away from the railing. You're going to fall off. Could she even hear me, or understand what I was saying? But was she even conscious? Her body juddered as if a current ran through her. The railing creaked dangerously. Elise, I yelled as she leaned to her left and fell. She immediately landed with a wet smack. We were only 2 floors up, but that fall wasn't good. It sounded horrible. I took a quick step towards the railing, bent my neck and looked down, biting back a scream at what I saw on the asphalt down there. The way her body was bent, it was all wrong, terribly so. Elbows smashed, kneecaps turned to goo, bones and her spinal cord jutting out of her neck, in the worms. I had been wrong. There wasn't just one worm in her body, there were hundreds of them. And they poured out of the newly smashed holes in her broken body, crawling over bones and flesh, and writhing and slithering on the ground. The sight made bile rise up in my throat. A crowd quickly gathered around her, surprised, scared, with a grotesque corpse. A corpse that suddenly came to life. It was beyond the realms of possibility, but Elise moved. Her limbs flailed around, sprayed blood and gore on those who had surrounded her body, as she then scuttled away in odd jerking motions like some crab-like monster. The crowd erupted in a boom of screams and moved away from her. Heart pounding in my chest, I ran back inside, quickly fumbled for my phone in the drawer and dialed Lil Pimp's number after bringing my hands under control. After telling him what I had just seen, I ran down to the madam's office to do the same. We searched all night. We didn't find her. Didn't find her for 11 days, in fact. 11 days we waited in tense silence, doing our jobs half-heartedly, wondering if someone else would be infected by those disgusting worms again. I was suspected the most, considering the fact that I had the closest contact with Elise. Well, me and Victoria. But she was missing too, and that only made everyone even more suspicious of me. Even a visit from a doctor familiar with the sketchy part of the city didn't help. With how strange things were happening around me, I was starting to get a little suspicious of myself too. I spoke to Lil Pimp and told him that if he were to find where either Elise or Victoria were, to tell me about it as soon as he could. Which he did, and the ensuing conversation took the madness to a completely new level. Hello, Natasha? It's me. Hey, I replied, tensed, wondering what he was going to tell me. So, I found Elise. Oh, that's great. Yep, tracked her down to an abandoned warehouse. I don't think she's doing all that well. What do you mean? Yeah, you'll see it for yourself when you get here, but that's not the important part. See, I found someone else here too, someone who was waiting for me outside the warehouse. I felt a lump in my throat. Who, Victoria? He sounded tense, afraid even. No, but close. It's the guy in the trench coat, the one who shot up the restaurant that you and Victoria were at. What the fuck's he doing there? I don't know. It feels all connected, doesn't it? But he wouldn't tell me. Wait, you actually talked to him? Yeah, I know, reckless. To be fair, the bastard came up on me before I could try killing him once again. Said he just wanted to talk. To you. About Victoria and Elise. My brain was throbbing against my skull. I could almost feel the bones stretching from the pressure. Christ. Another twist in the tale. I was getting sick and tired of this shit. Secrets within secrets, lies within lies. Just when I thought I was sliding the last piece in its place, Victoria walks in and tells me I'd been solving the wrong damn puzzle all along. So incredibly frustrating. Beads of sweat buttered on my forehead from the heat of the candles in the room. What the fuck are you talking about, Victoria? I asked. What do you mean she's going to destroy the city? She paced back and forth near the small coffee table, running her fingers around through her hair. I don't have time to explain. They're going to break through the door any second. We have to do this, quickly. Do what? I'll explain later. Just do as I tell you. I crossed my arms in defiance. No, I'm not doing shit until you tell me what's going on. She stopped, gritted her teeth, and clenched her fists. Okay, I'll give you the abridged version, so try and keep up. I nodded, turning my nose at the warm and musty stench in the room. Smelled like stale bread and molten wax in there. Right, she said. So to keep things nice and simple, we are not where you think we are right now. The house transported us somewhere else? And she shook her head. No, I mean, it can do that, but it hasn't. Yet. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm referring to something more fundamental than that. The city itself. What do you mean? This city doesn't exist in the world that you know of. It's more of a, She then twisted her hands in front of her, as if rubbing an invisible basketball. Pocket dimension. I blinked, confused. I know what it sounds like, she continued, but it's true. With everything you've seen, you know it's not outside the realm of possibility. So, like I said, we aren't on Earth right now. Exactly. Sure, you can access the internet and stuff, but in reality, we are very weakly connected to our world. The physical traffic, so to say, between our city and what we know as Earth is very tightly controlled. The Madam wants to change that, smash the barriers and force her way through. She paused for a moment, letting me digest this new information. The house is the key. The spell that is at its core, the one that allows it to move from place to place within the city, can be reworked and scaled up, applied on a citywide basis to transport us all, land and trees and buildings included, into the real world. And just like the house needs a sacrifice to work its magic, all the victims of the serial killer who live there, so does the scaled-up spell. The Madam is going to massacre half the city to bring her plans to fruition. I had no words. My thoughts were violently churning in my brain, like a cat tumbling around inside a washing machine. I settled for a simple response. Unfucking believable. The Madam wants to use my creation, the worms, to pull it off. Use them to make monsters like the one in the hallway outside, and unleash them on the city. What? Wait a second. Your creation? You created the worms? She bit her lip nervously. I didn't know what the Madam was planning, trust me. I just wanted to bring my family back. Those who were killed by my monstrous stalker. She promised me she'd help me, told me there was a way to cheat death. I didn't know what she was planning. I didn't know that she orchestrated the whole thing. She sent the stalker after me to kill people close to me, to give me the motivation to work on the spell. This wasn't making any sense in my mind. Why would she do that? Because I'm a witch, she replied in a matter-of-fact manner. Possibly the only one who could work the spell. I paused, and then slowly shook my head. Of course you are. We're running out of time, Natasha. We need to move, now. With trembling fingers, I rubbed my forehead. My scalp was tingling with anxiety and indecision. What should I do? Do I trust her? Was she telling the truth? I knew that the madam had been involved in this, that she'd been recording our sessions with our clients, that a ghostly presence wandered the establishment when it was shut down, and that she was most likely aware of it. But this? I could never have anticipated an explanation as insane as this. We weren't on Earth? A pocket dimension? A magic spell that can hurl the whole fucking city through space? What the fuck? Where even were we? Who or what created this place? And why? Why was the madam so desperate to leave that she was willing to massacre so many people? And what if Victoria was lying? She had already admitted to creating those god-awful worms, the ones that destroyed Elise. What else was she hiding? Trusting her would be idiotic. But honestly, what other choice did I have? I was alone, trapped inside a demonic apartment with a self-proclaimed witch, and the only man I could trust was outside fighting worm-crazed monsters supposedly created by this woman. Lil Pimp. I needed to get to him. If Victoria was telling the truth, we needed to help her put a stop to all of this. And even if she wasn't, and was instead working with the madam, like the stalker had claimed our best course of action would be to keep the two away from each other, at least until we could figure out what to do next. Our plan was to just take control of this apartment, to use it as a base to make our next move. Instead, it was fast turning into the stage for the final showdown. I sucked in a deep breath and exhaled. Okay, so what do you need? Elise, she replied. She's the key to all of this. What? How? She's the first subject that the transformation worked on, but I slowed the process down, so she's not going to turn into a beast like the one outside quite as quickly. So that's what's happening to her. I also added a failsafe in her. If I can reverse the transformation in her, it will end the ongoing transformation in everyone infected with those worms right now. It will put an end to the spell, buy us some time to try and stop the madam. I can't believe I'm saying this, Victoria, but that makes sense. If it was true. So how far into the transformation is she? She asked. And I shrugged. I don't know. She was turning into some strange worm thing last I saw her. Her shoulders relaxed. Good, good. She's still cocooning. We have time. Take me to her, please. I nodded. Okay, we can link up with Lil Pimp outside and he'll escort us to the warehouse where she's being kept. And fight with the stalker and the madam's forces along the way, of course, I thought. Awesome. Let me whip up a fire to deal with the brute outside then, she said. I nodded, then moved towards the door to check for any sound made by the monster. A realization struck me like an arrow dropping out of the sky. Wait. I turned around. Why can't we just use the house? Lil Pimp will keep the madam's forces engaged outside and we can transport ourselves to the warehouse where Elise is. And you can use your magic before they can get to us. It was too easy, so of course it wouldn't work. Victoria shook her head furiously. No, we'd need a sacrifice to do it, remember? And we don't exactly have one nearby, unless you're volunteering. I felt a chill on the back of my neck, little hairy spider legs brushing against my skin. No, that's just a joke. She can't actually kill me. She doesn't know where the warehouse is. Thank God I didn't tell her. Placing my hand against the cold wooden door, I watched as Victoria snuffed out the candles burning on top of a chair, lifted it over her head, and smashed it onto the floor. I flinched. She then bent over and wrenched a loose leg off the chair before tearing up a tablecloth and wrapping the rag around the broken piece of wood. My mouth dropped open when she closed her eyes and muttered something under her breath, only for the rag to flare with bright blue flames. Right, I said. A witch. She held her little torch in front of her and nodded at me. Her tense face dappled with quivering shadows. Okay, open the door when I tell you. I reached for the doorknob, wrapped my hand around it, and waited for any signs of movement from the monster outside. Straining my ears didn't help much. I couldn't hear anything over the distant sounds of gunfire. Be safe, Lil Pimp, I thought. Open it. My breath hitched in my chest, tightening it as I turned the knob and pulled the door open. Victoria padded across the floor, went past me and out into the hallway, causing the heat from the blue flames to wash over my face. I followed. The gunfire sounded louder there, but was still far more muted than it really should have been. The strange acoustics in the building made my head swim. The long-limbed bastard was standing near the front door, his back towards us. Faintly glowing candelabras lit up his lanky frame. Wispy gray hair fell over hunched shoulders. Dry, leathery skin stretched over unnaturally bent bones. I could see the outline of his spine as it pressed up against his flesh and skin, looking like a swollen white centipede. Bile coated my tongue. Disgusting creature. Victoria gestured at me to stay behind her and move towards the back door. I took a step sideways, and the floorboard creaked. Shit. The thing growled and whirled around, stretching his arms out and scratching the wallpaper on the walls of either side with black, jagged fingernails. Victoria waved the flaming stick in front of her, and the thing hesitated. Move, she whispered. I took a step back, and another, then another, with Victoria never straying more than a couple inches away from me. The creature advanced towards us, trying to get closer with each step, its simian face tensed with fear of the dazzling blue fire. Its baleful growls, mixed with the sound of tearing wallpaper and the muffled gunfire, outside sent steady pangs of fear, shooting through my heart. Yet I continued to move. Near the stairwell, about 10 meters away from the back door, I stumbled. My right ankle jabbed at my left shin and I wobbled, quickly placing my hands on the wall to steady myself. It didn't take long for me to regain my balance, but unfortunately, it wasn't the same for Victoria. She bumped into me, letting out a little yelp as she began falling, the stick slipping from her grasp and crashing down onto the floor, which immediately burst into flames. The hardwood floor set ablaze with fiery, smokeless flames that leapt at the walls and the roof, devouring everything in their path, shifting colors every second, blue then gold, then amber, then red like the devil's skin. Victoria screamed, like her very soul was being scorched. Then there was another scream, much more animalistic. I didn't see what it was. Crying, gasping, coughing, I crawled towards the back door. The heat was intense, hotter than any fire that I'd ever seen. Seemed to melt the flesh off my bones. My cheeks burned, my eyes watered, and immediately dried up as the tears evaporated. The fabric of my clothes seemed to stick to my skin like molten plastic. I could feel my lungs shrinking, my ribcage deflating from the sudden lack of oxygen. My vision darkened. I wasn't going to make it. Then there was an immense bang, and it made my heart tremble. The back door exploded outwards, shattering into 1,000 pieces. The air in front of me shimmered as a cold draft weakly pushed against the impenetrable wall of heat. Move! Something yelled behind me in a guttural voice. I dug my elbows into the scalding hot floor and propelled myself forward. When I reached the 3 small steps at the threshold of the door, I felt a mighty push at my back, sending me sliding across the floor and tumbling outside. The moist dirt felt like ice on my skin. I pressed my face against the mud, wanting to wriggle into the ground and hide. Hide until my flesh stopped burning. Get up. A hand, rough and warm on my back, caught me by the scruff of my neck, hauled me up to my feet. Let's go. I coughed and leaned against the person who lifted me up. Was it Victoria? Why couldn't I recognize her voice? I blinked and then glanced to my left. It was Victoria. Almost unrecognizable, though. Her clothes were torn to shreds, most of her skin charred black. Her jaw had been ripped clean off, tongue lapping inquisitively at big blood-stained teeth. Wide, lidless eyes glared at me. I whimpered, felt my knees go weak. How? I whispered. How the fuck are you still alive? She answered my question by starting to heal herself. Shredded tissues stitched themselves back together, flaps of skin slowly curling back into their appropriate place. Good God, she was just like the stalker. I'm putting my life in the hands of this monster? The sound of glass shattering jolted my eyes away from Victoria's hideous visage. On the corner of the street we were on was a car, its hood dented and windshield broken into pieces from the weight of the monstrosity that had slammed into it. The creature was identical to the one we'd seen inside the building, the one that had been burnt to ashes from the accidental fire. Bright flashes lit up the unlit alley as bullets slammed into the beast, causing its flesh to become mangled in the broken frame of the vehicle. The sound of boots clicking on asphalt bounded around the corner, followed by angry shouts. There's more of them. Kill it. Don't let it get close. Their voices were drowned out by the ensuing gunfire and harsh growls of the worm beasts. There's my car, Victoria said, sounding much more normal now. Quick, follow me. I gave one last look to the dead thing crammed into the crumpled car at the corner of the street and turned around and began following Victoria. She was practically naked now, burnt, shredded clothes draped over her bony frame like rags. Yet she marched across the street without a care in the world. Her car, a black SUV, was parked under a dull, flickering streetlight. As she went around to the driver's side, I pulled my phone out of my pocket, biting my lip and hoping that the heat hadn't destroyed it. And it worked. My heart leapt in jubilation. If nothing else, I could at least contact Lil Pimp. If he hasn't been killed by the monsters, or by the Madam's crooks. No, not letting that morbid shit fill my head. No way. Victoria's car chirped. She slid into the driver's seat, pushing the passenger door open moments later. Get in. No sooner had I jumped in did she bring the car to life. Sharp headlights splashed on the blacktop, and the car rolled towards the corner that cut around the side of the building. Where is the warehouse? She asked. I gave her vague directions and called Lil Pimp when she turned her face back towards the road. He didn't pick up the phone, but even if he had, I don't think I would have been able to say anything. The carnage that had occurred, that was still occurring on the streets, had my undivided attention. Blood and gore spattered the walls, flowed thickly in the cracks in the asphalt. Bodies everywhere, human, beasts, sometimes whole, often in pieces. Entrails festooned treetops, decapitated heads jammed between punctured tires, and the mangled frame of cars, a hellish nightmare come to life. Gunshots echoed in the neighborhood like a never-ending stream of thunder. Worm-infested demons in different stages of their transformation fell upon armed men who were shooting at each other. Some civilians were scurrying out of their homes to try and get away from all this madness. I couldn't see Lil Pimp or the stalker. Hell, I couldn't even see the faces of those in combat. Victoria pushed down on the accelerator and we began zooming out of the area, with the car bumping over the odd corpse or two. Two long-limbed worm bastards broke away from the ongoing battle and started chasing us. Holy shit, I exclaimed, gaping at the rearview mirror. They're coming after us. I could see that, Victoria said, picking up speed. There's a gun in the glove box. Shoot them if they get too close. I scrambled for the glove box, yanked it open, my hand frantically searching for the cold metal, almost squealing when I found it. The weight of the gun felt very reassuring in my hands. I knew that I could not really defend myself from some of the things I'd seen that night, using only one measly pistol. But the illusion that I could was more than enough to keep me going. The worm things ran after us with quick, loping strides, their eyes glinting under the glare of streetlights. I popped my head out of the window, felt the cold wind lash my face, and took aim. No, they were still too far away. With the distance and how the car was swerving, there was no way I could hit them. I needed to let them get close. My instincts were screaming at me, telling me that it was a terrible idea and that I could not allow that to happen. But I buried those instincts deep within me and settled back into my seat. They're too far away, I told Victoria as she made a sharp left turn, and she nodded. Keeping an eye on the rearview mirror, I called Lil Pimp again, and this time he answered, promptly. Natasha, where the fuck are you going? He was screaming, yet his voice was garbled, drowned out by the chaos around him. I'm with Victoria. We're heading back towards the warehouse. She says she can stop this, I shouted back. What about you? One of the worm monsters behind us roared. I shot a glance at the rearview mirror. How did they get so close? Hold on, Victoria shouted, and I braced myself against the seat. Still near the apartment building, Lil Pimp huffed. Fighting off these things. Razor and Madam showed up too. Started shooting at us before we could even so much as talk. Victoria pulled the handbrake and I pitched forward violently. The car shrieked as it made a sharp U-turn, causing the two monsters to go smashing through the glass doors of a salon. We turned again and set off towards the warehouse, having bought some time. Holy shit, I cursed. What happened? Lil Pimp asked. Are you okay? Yes, just meet us at the warehouse. All right, I'll meet you there. I hope you know what you're doing. Nat, be careful. The madam's gonna send some men after you. A shudder ran through me as he got the call. Of course she was coming after us. She was going to try and kill us with everything she had. "Here they come," Victoria shouted. I turned around thinking that the worm beast had caught up to us again. They had, but they weren't alone. 3 motorcycles were hot on their heels, their rumbling piercing through the air. Black jackets, black gloves, and bright red helmets. The madam's men. They'd caught up to us. I saw muzzle flashes and a sharp burst of gunfire, and the creatures began tumbling. "Oh, shit. We got a problem now," I said, sliding down in my seat. "Sounds like they've got some Uzis," Victoria said. "We're coming up on the industrial district, Natasha. Where's the warehouse?" I quickly gave her the exact address, despite myself. If things were even slightly more in control, I would have thought twice about it. "Just roll with the punches, Natasha," I kept telling myself. The car flew past a rusted wrought iron gate, causing the drowsy security guard to jump back in fright. We were fast coming up on the first factory in the area. This one was still functional, wide windows ablaze with fiery yellow light. I could hear the grinding of gears and churning of old machines. The workers inside were not even going to hear what was going on right outside. The sound of small stones raining down on glass caught my attention. I poked my head out from the gap between Victoria's seat and mine. The rear windshield now bore dozens of little holes. "They're shooting at us," I stated the obvious. "Well, shoot back," she spat just as a bullet tore through the back of her head, destroying her right eye, causing thick dark red blood and white gooey liquid to slide down her cheeks. She shook her head and the round fell on the steering wheel with a dull clang. "Bastards," she swore, wiping blood off the windshield. "We need to get rid of them." She really was a witch, or it was a terrific coincidence that loud shrieking sirens joined the noise of the night. I risked a peek at the side mirror and noticed flashing red and blue lights in the distance. And Victoria laughed. "Cops. Right on time for once." The bikes trailed off, turned around, and opened fire on the approaching police cars. "They won't be able to stop them for long," I said. "It'll be enough," she replied. The rest of the journey was relatively quiet, gave me the time to calm my nerves and collect my thoughts. But I was no closer to figuring out how to wriggle out of this mess when we arrived at the warehouse. The silence here was painful. My ears were still ringing from the non-stop gunfire. We jumped out of the car and marched towards the gate of the warehouse. The padlock hung loose from the latch. Thank God. And that was a lucky break. Victoria pulled the gate open with a metallic groan. It was dark inside. Beams of moonlight shot in through the shattered windows and illuminated the sides of the building. I switched on the flashlight of my phone, pointed it at the center of the warehouse. "There," I jabbed my finger at the dark silhouette of the coffin. "Elise isn't there. Or at least she was, last I checked." "Shut the gate," Victoria said as she strode towards the coffin. I swung the gate shut behind us, throwing the warehouse into a deeper darkness. The coffin was open by the time I reached there. Victoria was kneeling next to it, muttering something under her breath and drawing strange patterns on the wood with her fingernails. Elise laid motionless inside the coffin, her limbs twice the size they used to be. Her skull was deformed, looking almost ape-like. Her skin was dry, like sandpaper. She was lying on top of what I can only describe as a bed of old placenta. Smelled like it too, and it was throbbing. She was still transforming. I shone the flashlight at Victoria, wanting to ask her what she was doing, but deciding against it. This was way out of my pay grade. I clutched the gun tight in my hand for comfort. About 10 seconds later, the sound of a car crunching gravel drifted in. I rushed over to the nearest window and peered outside. It was a black SUV. Lil Pimp climbed out of the car. A smile crossed my face, but froze halfway when I saw him put his hands in the air. The stalker got out behind him, pointing a gun at his head. The madam was next. Old, wrinkled face set in a regal expression. Short, neatly combed gray hair. Her very presence was intimidating. Victoria was right. The stalker and the madam were working together. More cars were pulling up on the warehouse. Madam's forces, all of them. I understood what must have happened. Lil Pimp's soldiers had been subdued. The worm things were dead, and no cops in sight. Checkmate. And this was why you did not fuck with the madam. Victoria, she shouted, her voice loud and commanding. It's over. Stop this nonsense already. I looked behind me. Victoria was still busy chanting. Hurry up already, I thought. Did you really think I'd let you stop me? She continued. You of all people know how hard I've worked to get this far, to break free from this fucking prison. I won't let anything get in my way, not when I've come this far. She signaled at her men to start surrounding the warehouse. She was just talking to buy them time. Victoria, child, you really picked an awful time to develop a conscience. I am so deeply disappointed. After all the terrible things you've done until now, to try and stop this close to finishing the line? How absurd. I backed away from the window and moved towards the coffin. Victoria, I whispered furiously. You better come up with a goddamn miracle quick. We're about to get swarmed any second. I'm coming in, Victoria, the madam's voice boomed outside. A gasp, short, rough, like it was pulled through weak, diseased lungs. It wasn't me, and it wasn't Victoria either. I looked inside the coffin. It was Elise. She was awake. Her eyes, tired but full of life, were darting around. Her limbs had shrunk back to their original size. Her skin was wet, pink. She was turning back to normal. She was nothing but bones, though. I did it, Victoria said, her voice full of wonder. I actually did it. The spell is reversed. She can't use it to slaughter the city anymore. She was cut off by the sound of shattering glass and heavy boots landing on concrete floor. Dozens of flashlights mounted on rifles swung our way. Then the gate was thrown open. The madam walked in, flanked by Razor and Lil Pimp, who was still being held at gunpoint by the stalker. Ah, the madam said. Found you. It's over, you bitch, Victoria spat. The spell won't work anymore. I ended it. Her proud declaration made the madam take a pause. What do you mean? Take a look for yourself, she replied as we helped Elise get up on her feet. You recognize her? Elise? But how? I fixed her. The worms are all gone now. Dead, like they should be. You fucking bitch. The madam was screaming now. Why did you do that? Because it's psychotic to slaughter an entire city. A tense silence fell over the warehouse like a heavy black shroud. It wasn't Victoria who'd said that. It was Razor. She gawped as her most trusted lieutenant drew his gun on her. A knot swelled up in my throat. I didn't understand why, but Razor was betraying his master. For a second, it looked like what would be the end of this nightmare. But of course, it wasn't that easy. It never is. The stalker was quick to react, slapped Razor's gun away, and launched himself at the burly man, only to get tackled by Lil Pimp. Then the warehouse erupted into utter chaos. Razor's men turned on the others and bullets started flying everywhere. Victoria grabbed Elise and forced her down onto the ground. I ducked behind the coffin, covered my head with my hands. More muzzle flashes and gunshots that echoed in the large, empty warehouse. Blood was everywhere. I wanted to dig a hole under the coffin and hide until everyone there was dead. Well, not everyone. Lil Pimp was out there struggling to survive. I had dragged him into this mess. I couldn't just abandon him and save myself. A bullet slammed into the coffin near me, sending splinters flying in all directions. Less than a second later, I popped my head out, gun aimed straight ahead. Razor and Lil Pimp were fighting with the stalker, slashing him open with their knives, but he was quickly stitching himself back together. The madam was sitting on Victoria's chest, choking her. How was she this strong? Was she a witch too? If yes, then why did she need Victoria's help at all? There was so much I didn't understand about this. I needed to shoot first and think later. The gun rocked in my hand, sending a small cloud of smoke in the air. The madam's body shook with the impact of the bullet in her chest, and her eyes turned black. She snarled. My fingers curled around the trigger again. 3 more shots. I kept firing at her torso until the gun ran empty. You had your fun yet, Natasha? she growled. Bitch, Victoria coughed, then held onto her head. Time to go to sleep. The madam screamed as her scalp began to sizzle. Victoria's hands turned red and began to fuse with the madam's skull. Smoke rose up from the point of contact. Bile coated my throat, splashed my tongue as I watched the two women melt into each other. Bones snapped, skin sloughed around, and flesh consumed flesh until they were nothing but an unrecognizable pile of goo on the floor. Victoria had sacrificed herself to kill the madam, in the most grotesque manner imaginable. And that just left the stalker. I hauled myself up on my feet. The fighting had died down. Everyone there was too terrified at the spectacle Victoria had put up to do anything else but stare at the fleshy mess on the floor. Everyone except the stalker. He was still fighting, volleying punch after punch at low pump. Razor was lying motionless on the ground nearby, a big hole punched through his chest. I bent and picked up a shotgun off a corpse. A solid fist sent low pump reeling, cleared the way for me to pack the stalker's chest full of shells. The bald fucker fell backwards, his white shirt now soaked with blood, and I stepped towards him. He coughed. You know you can't kill me with that. His wounds started knitting themselves back together. I fired again and blew half his head off. And he healed. You don't know what you're doing. Another shot. If the designer knew what you were doing to me, his voice then trailed off. Another shot. My gun was the only one firing in the warehouse at this point. Then I fired again, and the shotgun was empty. The stalker moaned and tried to lift himself up. I felt someone tap on my shoulders. I didn't look behind me. I didn't have to. Low Pimp presented me with another gun, a pistol this time. I fired at the stalker's head again. It was satisfying, wearing this bastard down piece by piece. All the shit I had gone through to finally get back at one of the instigators like this was beyond satisfying. A rifle, another shotgun, 2 more pistols, more and more and more. Empty shells began forming little hills around my feet, and I kept cycling through the weapons, slowly killing this motherfucker. I don't know how many guns I went through, but I'd done it. The stalker's healing stopped, and he finally lay dead on the floor. That did it. I think he's really dead now, Low Pimp whispered. Well, let's not risk it. Cut him up and throw his body in a furnace. Drown the ashes in the sea if you have to. Yeah, okay, he replied. It was over. Thousands of questions still buzzed in my head. Who created our city? Was it the designer that the stalker just spoke of? Was he working for this designer? Then why help the madam try and escape? Why did she want to leave so badly? Who really was Victoria, and what was the source of her powers? So many questions, but at least I was alive to dwell on them. God, I need a break. Low Pimp smirked. Of course you do. I'd say you've more than earned it. Madam. I frowned. He gestured me to look around. The remaining soldiers weak, but alive. And there was Elise. And they were all looking at me. Expectantly.